Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto learns at a young age reality of his parents part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Hey brat! Get back here, Naruto! The shout rang down the dark alley as the man shook his fist in anger. His target was a small boy, no more than 5 years of age, who was running as fast as he could down the alley. Clutched in the Naruto's left hand was a small loaf of bread, which he took small bites of as he ran. Munching noisily, Naruto turned his head to look at the angry man, laughing through the bread in his mouth. He stuck out a crumb-covered tongue out at him, trying to get the man angry. Unfortunately, he hadn't been watching where he was going, and he tripped on a carelessly discarded cardboard box. Naruto fell onto the paved ground with a thud, the bread flying from his hands. He wailed in pain as he felt his newly bruised ass, tears coming to his eyes. Looking behind him towards the angry baker, he realized that he had pissed the man off enough that the baker was chasing him down, waving an iron pipe in his hands. Naruto was terrified, and he tried to get up and run away. He almost got up, but his left foot landed on the discarded loaf and slipped, sending him face first into the ground once more. He groaned, and tried to get up again. But Naruto felt a blinding pain in his back, and he screamed aloud in pain. The man raised his iron pipe once more and prepared for another swing. The boy looked at him and cried out for mercy, pleading with the man. The man hesitated, and lowered the iron bar. But his eyes looked at the boy's face. He noted the whisker marks on the Naruto's cheeks, and his lips split in an obscene grin. He raised the pipe once more and smashed into the lad's skull with such force that the pipe was dented. Naruto was nearly knocked unconscious, and was plainly dazed. The man laughed in sadistic pleasure, and proceeded to beat the boy, breaking bones and breaking open skin and flesh. Finally, the man stopped, and looked at the battered and bloody mess of the boy. His face saddened for a moment, then hardened again. Cursing the boy, he spat on him and stomped his booted foot into the lad's back. There was a loud crack as the boy's spine snapped, accompanied by harsh laughter from the brutal man. He grabbed the remnants of the loaf from the ground and threw them at the nearly dead boy. He paused for a moment, looking at the lad, before turning around and walking away, tossing the pipe onto the ground as he did so. He was confident that he wouldn't get punished for his treatment of the lad. In fact, if he was lucky and the boy died, he might even get treated as a hero. After all, he had beaten the demon brat to within an inch of his life. Besides, the kid had deserved it, by stealing his bread. Well, yeah, he had thrown it out, and it was going to the garbage anyways, but still, it was his. He shook his head and decided not to think about it anymore. He didn't want to feel guilty about anything. The boy moaned softly, fingertips twitching in pain. He couldn't feel his legs. Okay, that's weird. He tried to wiggle his fingers and got some response, but he could barely feel anything. And his entire body ached and burned. Ow. This really hurts. And my back, ow. He tried to shift his back, to get into a better position, but as soon as he tried, he screamed in pain as his back filled with white-hot pain. Okay, that's not a good idea. Everything hurts so much he opened his eyes and stared up into the swiftly darkening sky. Oh no. It's gonna rain. Just my luck. Shortly it began to rain, just as the boy had predicted. He groaned and wished he was somewhere else, that someone would help him. But he couldn't move, and he knew that no one would try to help him. So he just lay there, watching the sky. But something caught his attention. He heard someone walking down the alley he was in, but it was behind him, and he couldn't see who it was. Whoever it was came to a stop just behind the boy's head, and knelt down over the lad. The boy was going to question him, but a quick wave of the stranger's hand cut him off. The newcomer walked around the boy, stopping by his feet and kneeling again. Now, the boy could see the stranger's appearance. He was obviously a shinobi, thanks to the thigh holster that held his weapons, and his Itachi. Naruto couldn't see the man's face, since he was bending over Naruto's legs, examining his injuries. He also had black hair, and he wore dark clothing. The only thing on him that wasn't that same black color was a small symbol on the sleeve of his wide-neck shirt, which showed a small red and white fan. Naruto's eyes widened at the sight of it, for he knew the only people allowed to wear that symbol were from the great Uchiha clan. He gulped loudly, because he had heard that some of the strongest ninjas were from that clan. Ano, are you an Uchiha? The man started, having been under the impression that the boy was unconscious from his wounds. The fact that this kid has lost so much blood and suffered so many injuries and was still conscious was nothing short of amazing. The stranger looked up into Naruto's face, examining him minutely before replying with a short nod. Naruto was going to ask another question, but he had seen the man's face. The man had 2 long lines running diagonally from his eyes to his cheekbones, which gave his serious face a frightening appearance. But most frightening of all were his eyes. They blazed a crimson red, and it held 3 small dots that slowly orbited the pupil. Those eyes seemed to delve deep into Naruto's soul, searching it from top to bottom, judging him at the very core of his being. He tried to look away from the man's gaze, but he could not. Those scarlet orbs encompassed his vision, until he was nearly absorbed into them. Suddenly, Naruto was free. The man had closed his eyes and was rubbing them, as if in pain. He looked at him again sharply, the eyes no longer red, but a dark black. Tell me, boy, what is your name? Naruto gulped again, still worried by this man. Ano Uzumaki Naruto. The man nodded at his answer, clearly expecting it. Well, Uzumaki Naruto. I am Uchiha Itachi. Now, remain completely motionless, or I will be forced to knock you out. Naruto gulped and nodded slightly, wincing from the pain in his neck. Itachi seemed satisfied by his answer, and slowly reached over to the boy's stomach, lifting the grubby t-shirt that covered it. Naruto was about to complain, but a glance from Itachi stopped him. Itachi looked closely at Naruto's stomach for a while, then set one of his hands on it. Gently, he began pouring chakra into Naruto's stomach, his eyes searching the skin. Suddenly, a symbol emerged from within Naruto's skin, black against his flesh. It was in the shape of a spiral, with some strange markings surrounding it. Itachi frowned for a moment, thinking hard. Naruto, on the other hand, was wondering what the hell was going on. Oh, what is that thing? It looks weird. He had seen the thing, and was surprised to say the least. Itachi gave him an annoyed look, but he pressed on. What the hell did you do to my stomach? You gay pedophile. Itachi got a pissed look in his face, and suddenly the red eyes sprang back into life, swallowing his black orbs. Naruto shut his mouth immediately, more frightened than he had ever been before. You want to know what that is? You really wish to know? Do you want to test the depth of your capacity, to explore the borders of your potential? Naruto, despite his fear, was curious. He nodded again, the pain in his neck fading. Itachi smirked, staring into Naruto's eyes. Very well. Then prepare to meet your inner demon. Naruto was puzzled, but suddenly something in Itachi's eyes changed, and Naruto's vision faded away into darkness. Slowly, he regained a bit of his vision. He blinked his eyes quickly, trying to will away the darkness around him. As his eyes adjusted, he glanced around him, taking in his surroundings. He was in some kind of sewer, with a low ceiling and close walls. There was water covering the floor, reaching up to his ankles. He wondered where he was, but decided not to think about it. Suddenly, he felt something grab his shoulder. He turned around quickly and saw Itachi standing next to him. Itachi looked into his eyes once more. This is your final chance. You can turn back now. Are you prepared? Are you willing to pay the price of power? Naruto, excited at the prospect of becoming stronger, nodded vigorously. As he did so, he realized his body no longer hurt. He looked down at himself, and was surprised to see every wound gone. His grubby old clothes didn't even have any blood on them. He was awed, and turned to ask Itachi about it. But Itachi was walking away, down the long dark hallway. Naruto ran after him, trying not to slip in the water. Finally, he caught up to Itachi, but was hard-pressed to stay by him. Itachi was taking full advantage of his height to take long strides, eating up the distance with each step. Naruto, on the other hand, was barely 2.5 feet tall, and had to take 3 steps for every step Itachi took. Naruto was so concentrated on keeping up with Itachi that he didn't notice that he had stopped, and bumped into Itachi's back. Almost slipping, he caught himself and glared at Itachi, who couldn't have cared less. We're here. Hold out your hand. Itachi pointed at a door that Naruto hadn't noticed before. It was just a metal door, except that it had a symbol engraved into the front of it. The same symbol that Naruto had seen on his stomach. Curious, he laid his hand against the door. Almost immediately, he withdrew it, wincing in pain. Ouch. That burns, damn it. He stuck his singed fingers into his mouth, glaring at Itachi. Itachi merely shrugged and motioned to the door. The door was turning red, and steam rose from the bottom of the door, where it was in the water. The symbol on the front of the door melted away, and then the heat of the door left, as quickly as it had come. Itachi opened the now plain door and walked through, not waiting for Naruto. Naruto cursed under his breath, muttering a few choice words learned from a childhood on the street. He ran to catch up to Itachi again, but paused once he passed through the doorway. Because there, not 20 feet in front of him, was a large cage. No, not just a large cage, an immense cage, with the door being over 100 feet high. But strangely enough, the door had no lock. All it had was a scrap of paper holding it shut, which had a couple of symbols on it. Naruto had never learned to read or write kanji, and he was clueless as to what it meant. Itachi didn't seem bothered by any of it, though, and walked up to the door of the cage. He examined the door of the cage minutely for a minute, with Naruto hanging back at the entrance of the room. Then, he turned around and beckoned Naruto, who walked up warily, still remembering his singed fingers. Itachi pointed at the door, and Naruto went up to the door and reached out to it. He hesitated for a moment and looked at Itachi, who nodded at him. He choked down his fear and laid his hand on one of the bars, praying it wouldn't burn him. Much to his joy, it didn't. In fact, it didn't seem to react at all. He turned around and looked at Itachi, who was slowly backing away. Oh, Itachi! Where the hell you going? Itachi didn't reply, but simply kept backing away. Naruto was getting somewhat freaked out by now. "Ano, Itachi, what's going on?" Itachi froze and looked up and behind Naruto. Naruto, wondering what was behind him, made to turn around, but couldn't seem to move his legs. He looked down and saw that his legs and feet were encased in a red bubbling energy. From behind him, he heard a strange noise, like a really big dog growling. He craned his neck backwards to see what was behind him. He saw a huge fox, easily 100 feet tall, crouching down and staring at him. It had red fur and 9 waving tails, and its crimson eyes were slitted and filled with anger. It continued growling at him, and its breath stank of death and blood. Its gigantic claws were stained crimson with blood, and its tails thrashed against the walls of the cage. Naruto stared at the thing, eyes wide open, and every muscle in his body shaking in terror. The demon's great head came right up to the bars of the cage, taking great sniffs of the boy, getting a feel for his scent. Its eyes widened, then narrowed in incredible malice. It snapped its teeth at Naruto, roaring in rage. Then it lifted a great paw and thrust it at Naruto, its razor-sharp claws gleaming dully. But before it could strike, Itachi was there, breaking Naruto free and carrying him away from the fox. The fox howled in frustration, the sound rattling every bone in Naruto's small body. Itachi stood resolute despite the great beast's rage, and his eyes blazed out in full crimson glory. He set Naruto down on the wet ground and moved towards the fox, his eyes focused on it, staring it down. He walked right up to the bars, and the fox's roars died away into nothingness as it stared at him. "I am Uchiha Itachi. You will not harm this boy." "Calm down, he means you no harm." The fox snarled again, intrigued in this boy who dared to challenge him. "And who are you, who so boldly challenges the Kyuubi no Kitsune? Come, insolent brat, show me the power in your eyes." Itachi bowed his head and closed his eyes for a moment, as if in prayer. Then he lifted his head once more and his eyes slammed open, blazing in all their crimson might. The Kyuubi stared right back at him, testing his mettle. Then it reared its head back and laughed, a thunderous noise that shook the foundations of the cage. "I see confidence and arrogance in your gaze, boy. I find you deserving of the power of the Sharingan. Such power I have not seen since last I laid eyes on Uchiha Madara. His blood flows true in you, I see." Itachi's eyes widened in wonder, and he bowed to the great fox, paying homage to his power. "I have heard tales of your might and greatness, Kyuubi-sama, but truly I see that you surpass them all. I am glad you find me worthy of the power you so graciously gave to my ancestors. I promise you that the fiery will that you gave us will not be lost. I will ensure that." Kyuubi chuckled again, obviously liking Itachi's attitude. "Excellent. I would hate to see such a powerful gift go to waste. And why have you brought that thing into my chambers? I will not forgive even one such as you of this crime." The Kyuubi glared at Naruto, some of its malice coming back into its crimson eyes. Naruto, who had been scared up until now, got pissed off by the insult. "Who is this fox, that he thinks he can get off with calling me a thing? I'll rip him a new asshole." He ran up to stand next to Itachi, and stuck his small hands on his hips. "Listen here, you damn fox. No one insults Uzumaki Naruto. I'll beat your head and so far, you'll shit it out." The Kyuubi stared at him, shock and amusement strong in its bestial features. Then, it laughed louder than ever. "Brat, you would threaten me? Young one, you perhaps do not realize who I am. I am the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the head of the Fox clan, the Lord of Fire. You are nothing more than a maggot compared to the likes of me, boy." He was cut off by Naruto, who was getting madder and madder the more the Kyuubi talked. Yeah, shut up, you furry bastard. No one gives a shit about who you are. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and I'm gonna kick your fuzzy ass all the back to hell." Naruto was screaming at the fox now, clutching onto the bars of the cage with all his strength. The Kyuubi stared at him, incredulous. Then its lips parted in an immense grin. "Heh, there seems to be more to you than meets the eye. Maybe you are fit to be my vessel. Itachi, what think you of this boy?" Itachi knelt before Kyuubi, arms crossed in supplication. Naruto was stunned by this, but was ignored. "Kyuubi-sama, he seems remarkably resilient, even without your aid. His chakra reserves are far beyond normal, especially for a child his age. His potential is greater than almost any other that I have seen, excepting myself. There is, of course, his unfortunate lack of a bloodline, but no one is perfect. I would give him my approval, Kyuubi-sama, with your permission." Naruto stared bug-eyed at Itachi, wondering how Itachi had figured out that much about him in just a minute or so of looking at him. Kyuubi was nodding in acceptance of Itachi's answer, and gave Naruto a close scrutiny. "Very well. You say his body should be adequate, and I have seen the strength of his spirit. Now, what of his mind? I cannot see his conscious thought, thanks to the seal." Naruto stared at the fox in anger. "Bastard fox, you calling me stupid? I'll kill you!" He was interrupted by a roar from the Kyuubi, and fell over on his ass, staring at the fox in fright. "You will be silent. You have proven your courage already, little one, now prove your wisdom. It is not wise to aggravate an enemy who outmatches you in power. Follow Itachi's example." At this Itachi looked up, his eyes calculating and cold, at the Kyuubi. It chuckled again, a low rumble spreading through the room. Yes, Itachi, I know you are merely pretending. If I thought that you were truly being so subservient, I would kill you myself. A true Uchiha, with a fiery spirit, would never bow before anyone. Itachi nodded in understanding and stood to his feet, glancing in dismay at his now wet knees. You are correct, Kyuubi. I bow to no man. Or demon, for that matter. And, as to Naruto's mental ability, that I cannot judge. I trust that he will be sufficient for your needs, though. Now, will you give him your blessing, Kyuubi? Naruto looked from Itachi to Kyuubi, wondering what was happening. Kyuubi went quiet, seeming to consider Itachi's words carefully. Yes, I will give him my blessing. Young one, I shall grant you my power. But are you ready for it? Are you prepared to be an outcast, to be hated and feared, to be alone because of your power? Truly, what I give you is a double-edged blade. Have you strength enough to bear the burden? This is the only time I will offer it. The fox went silent again, staring at Naruto. Itachi stared as well, wondering if Naruto was able to accept. Itachi knew the depths of the fox's statement, and he realized the pain of being hated and feared because of your power, to become arrogant because of your strength. Naruto was shocked. A gigantic fox had yelled at him, told him to shut up, then offered him power. He didn't know what to think. But then his mind brought up memories. Of being thrown out of the orphanage at 3 years old. Of being at the point of starvation over and over. Of wondering why he was alone, why he was hated. Of thinking that he had a friend, only to be abandoned later. Of hoping for a better future, only to find his present nearly unbearable. He gritted his teeth in anger as he thought back to all the times people had treated him cruelly, taking what little he had away from him, leaving him with nothing. His eyes snapped up to look Kyuubi dead in the eyes, searching for some note of anger or trickery. But there was nothing there, nothing that he could read. His life had taught him over and over again to trust no one, to doubt everything. Yet here was Itachi, who he had never seen before in his life, who actually came to him with aid. This guy, who couldn't have been older than 15, who opened the door to power for Naruto. Now, all he had to do was accept the fox's offer, and he would be able to defend himself. No more beatings, no more having to steal, no more weakness. A grin spread over his small face, accented by the whisker marks on his cheeks. A tear ran down his face, and Itachi started. He looked closely at Naruto's face, and shook his head. He saw, reflected in the lad's eyes, the pain and misery he had gone through all of his life. To never know happiness, to never have someone to love, someone to cry with, someone to help and be helped by. He, at least, had Sasuke, his little brother. He tried to imagine Naruto's life, and blanched at the thought. Even though it was only a little over 5 years long, it had enough pain and anguish in it to last a century. No child should have to go through such torment. However, his thoughts were interrupted by Naruto's voice. Well, Fox, I'll take it. Itachi looked at the boy again, startled by the incredible mix of emotions in the boy's voice. The fox seemed taken aback, as well. It had thought that there was too much fear in Naruto, too much that he couldn't face. He wouldn't have expected this small boy to accept so quickly. The fox decided to give him one last chance to change his mind. You are sure, small one? This is the path that you will walk? And you know what this entails? Naruto nodded, his mind obviously made up. Kyuubi sighed in acceptance. Very well then. Boy, go to the seal on the door. That scrap of paper. Now, when I tell you to, remove it from the doorway. But only when I tell you to, any sooner or later, and we shall both perish. Naruto nodded his acceptance, and walked over to the door of the cage. When he reached it, the seal descended from its place up high on the doorway until it was directly in front of Naruto. He turned to the Kyuubi and nodded, waiting for his signal. At the lad's show of readiness, the Kyuubi closed his eyes, delving deep into his vast memory to find what he sought. If the seal was removed, then both Naruto and the Kyuubi would die, and that was the last thing that the demon wanted. So, he had to find another seal that would work more to their benefit. After a minute of searching through the dusty corners of his mind, he found one that would work. It was an old fox seal that could easily be modified, so that he could do what was necessary. Bending his head down, he touched his nose to the back of the cage door, and prepared the seal. When all was ready, he sent Naruto a quick mental signal, signifying his own readiness. Naruto pulled with all his might, ripping it off the cage door. Right as it left the surface of the door, the Kyuubi implanted his seal into the gap left behind. The door writhed and contorted, as the seal began to take form. Soon, the door was twisted into another shape altogether. The bars of the door were removed, and the new seal seemed to hang in midair. The entire cage had disappeared, and the only proof of the Kyuubi's imprisonment lay in a glowing blue line that ran across the floor, ceiling, and walls. But there was a small 2-foot gap in the blue line on the floor, where the color changed from blue to red. Itachi walked over to the discolored line and inspected it, nodding his approval. There, it is done. Boy, I give to you my power, my skill, and my knowledge. It will come slowly, over time, lest it destroy you. With this gift, you have become my representative on this world of Ninjenkai. Also there is one more thing to be done. Come here, boy. Naruto moved forward until he came to the red line. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped through it. Once he reached the inside of the cage, the Kyuubi reached down and nuzzled the back of his left shoulder with its huge nose. Naruto screamed in pain. It felt like his shoulder was on fire, and he reached through the neck of his t-shirt to grasp his wounded shoulder. After a moment, the pain left him, and he took off his shirt to examine his shoulder. There, on the outside of the shoulder where the Kyuubi's nose had touched him, was a strange mark. It was a strange mark, some kind of kanji that he couldn't read. "Ano Kyuubi, I can't read that. What does it say?" The fox looked at him in an almost friendly way. "That, little one, is in the language of the kitsune. It marks you as one of our own, and serves as a warning to those who would attack you. Welcome to the clan, Kit. You're one of the foxes now." Naruto looked startled for a moment, before a wide grin came to his face. Tears started pouring down his eyes, and he looked at the Kyuubi in amazement. "You mean I have a clan? Really?" The fox laughed at the boy, wondering at his amazement. "Yes, Kit. And don't disgrace the name of the kitsune with your ridiculous antics. Now be gone, boy. I have things to do. Itachi, take him from here." Itachi nodded in understanding, and grabbed the shocked Naruto by the arm and hauled him off. Just as they got to the door of the room, Kyuubi stopped them. "Kit, one last thing. You can access my power, but never take more than I give you. Understood, boy?" Naruto looked at him, curiosity overcoming caution. "What do you mean I can use your power? What are you talking about, Baka Fox?" Kyuubi growled in fake anger at the kid's new nickname for him. "I meant exactly what I said. I will hold you responsible for what happens if you do not do as I say, Kit." This last statement was accompanied by a demonic stare, and Naruto cowered back in fright, nodding vigorously. "You got it, boss. I won't disobey. I promise." Naruto stood straight and gave a stiff salute. Itachi had to stifle a chuck, and the Kyuubi grinned widely. "I'll hold you to that, brat. Now get going." Itachi grabbed Naruto roughly by the shoulders and spun him around to face him. He looked deeply into Naruto's eyes, the Sharingan wheel spinning rapidly. Naruto felt a strange feeling in his eyes, and he blinked to make it leave. When he blinked though, his eyes wouldn't open again. He struggled, but then he lost all strength and senses. He fell into unconsciousness. Suddenly his vision was restored. He blinked and looked around, once more finding himself in the alley. His body didn't hurt, and he flexed and tensed his muscles to feel for any injuries. Surprisingly, he couldn't feel anything. He shrugged it off and started looking for Itachi, who he found collapsed on the alley pavement at Naruto's feet. He panicked and knelt down next to Itachi, shaking him. Itachi-san, you okay? Or what's wrong? Say something, you bastard." Naruto was starting to get hysterical, full of fear that the only nice person he'd ever known might have died. He kept on shaking him, trying to get him to wake up, to say something, to convince Naruto that he was all right. But nothing happened. He was completely unresponsive. Naruto released the body, sitting down on the ground. Tears flowed from his eyes, and the more he wiped them away, the more they came. Damn it, why did he have to die? He was a nice guy. He treated me okay, and now he's dead. It's not fair. It's not fair. He balled his hands and pounded them into Itachi's back, becoming hysterical. Suddenly, a hand shot up from underneath Itachi's body, grasping Naruto's neck in a vice grip. Naruto froze, fear freezing his muscles. Then Itachi's body moved, rolling sideways away from Naruto. Naruto gasped in shock as he saw Itachi's eyes wide open and staring at him, and the hand around his neck gripped even harder, choking him. Naruto was gasping for air now, both from the shock and the chokehold. "Naruto, if you ever hit me while I'm asleep again, you will not live to regret it." Itachi's eyes closed again, going back into the peaceful sleep in which Naruto had roused him from. The hand around Naruto's neck relaxed and fell away, leaving him panting and gasping for air. Naruto rubbed his throat, feeling the bruises on his neck from Itachi's chokehold. Suddenly, he heard a chuckling. He glanced around him, worried that he was going to get beaten again, but he saw no one. He heard it again, this time louder, and stood up straight in preparation to run away. "Stand down, Kit. It is only me. By Enma, you are as tense and high-strung as a newborn pup. Calm down, young one." Naruto looked around for the source of the voice, getting seriously freaked out. "Hey, come out! Stop hiding!" He heard the chuckling again, and got pissed. "Damn it, cut it out! Where the hell are you?" This time, full-blown laughter. "Damn it! Stop it!" "Silence, Kit. I am speaking to you mentally. This is a direct communication between my psyche and yours, and no amount of shouting will change that." Naruto quieted down before reflecting on what he had just been told. What the hell did you just say? I didn't understand it." There was a long heartfelt groan, and some small muttering. "Ah, I see. Looks like you have a lot to learn, if you could not understand even that. Very well, on account of your age, I am willing to teach you. Shall I make it simple? I am in your head, Kit." Naruto seemed to understand at last, and thought about it carefully. "So, you're that big fox that I saw? Cue something?" There was a roar from within his mind. "Cue something? Is that how you address the Kyuubi no Kitsune, brat? You're lucky I feel merciful today, Kit. And don't talk to me out loud, it looks stupid. Simply think the words you wish to say to me. There was a long pause as Naruto's 5-year-old brain processed this new information. Then, something clicked, and he understood. So, you're saying that you're in my head? So all that stuff that happened with me and Itachi-san, that was all in my head? How'd that happen? Kyuubi chuckled again, this time in surprise. Good, you have a brain in your head. Itachi holds a great gift, something I gave one of his ancestors. It has been passed down his family for generations. You know it as the Sharingan. Naruto nodded, thinking back to Itachi's crimson eyes. Okay, I get that, but how does that let him into my head? That still doesn't make any sense. Kyuubi sighed again, obviously wearying of explaining everything. Kit, I am not in the mood to explain it right now. Ask him next time you get the chance. But before I go, there are a few things I do have to explain. One of them is the current state of your body. Naruto was puzzled, and started examining himself, looking over his condition. Ano, I look okay. What do you mean? Kyuubi made an impatient noise. Kit, that's the whole point. You're fine. But just a short time ago, you had multiple broken bones and fractures, and a remarkably big concussion. And now you're just fine. Aren't you wondering why? Naruto bent his head in though, pondering the Kyuubi's words. Nope. As long as I feel okay, I don't care why it happened. He laughed as he heard the Kyuubi groan in aggravation. Okay, just kidding. So, why did it happen, Baka Fox? Firstly, never call me that. You will refer to me as Lord Kyuubi, and be damned grateful for the opportunity. Now, as for the cause of your condition, you may also thank me for that. A side effect of my chakra is the regeneration of bodily cells and tissues, which is far more efficient than your own natural processes of flesh restoration. Naruto puzzled his way through half of the explanation, completely ignoring the Kyuubi's initial point, and discovered that he had no idea what the demon was talking about. Ano, you're not making any sense. Can you explain that again? There was silence from Kyuubi for a long moment, as he strove to maintain what self-control he had left. Look, brat, my chakra heals you. Okay? That's all you need to know for now. There are some other effects in your body as well, such as advanced hearing and sight, as well as enhanced smell and taste. There may be other side effects, but I cannot know until they become apparent. You are the first human ever to be inducted into the Kitsune clan, Kit. Make sure that you prove yourself worthy of the honor. As he finished his speech, he noticed that Naruto was being exceptionally quiet. What ails you, boy? Ano, what's chakra? There was a long pause, and Naruto was afraid that the Kyuubi had gone for good. What? Was it something I said? But before long, Kyuubi replied, but in a weary and tired voice. Kit, you don't know anything. I'll have to teach you so much. Well, for now, just think of chakra as your life energy, which grows as you do. Because I've lived for a long time, I have quite a bit of chakra. This is at your disposal, boy, and I expect you to be grateful. Now leave me be. I wish to sleep. Until next time, Kit. The voice in the back of Naruto's head went silent, leaving Naruto to ponder what the Kyuubi had told him. Speaking of the Kyuubi, he tried to remember what little he had heard concerning the beast. No one ever said anything directly to Naruto about it, but he had overheard a conversation between the Sandaime Hokage and one of his shinobi. They had met in an alley where Naruto was sleeping in a dumpster, and were talking about something that was happening off in some other country. Well, somewhere in the conversation, someone had said something about demons, and piqued Naruto's interest. But all they mentioned about the Kyuubi was that it had attacked Konoha and was responsible for the death of the Yondaime Hokage. But if that was true, why was the demon inside Naruto? And why the hell was there a seal on his belly button? He thought some more, surprisingly deep considering his 5 years of age. But Naruto was a child of the streets, and if you can't think quickly and think well on the spot, you won't live long. Many were the time when Naruto was surrounded by people intent on beating him to a pulp, only to trick them and disappear. He had learned to be fast, to be cautious, and to never trust anyone. He wasn't cautious when he stole that moldy loaf the baker had left in the alley, and was thrashed soundly because of it. Another thing the dark alleyways of Konoha had taught him was that he would do anything to survive. He would have died before ever he turned 4, had he not turned to stealing to get food. He couldn't get by on begging, because if he was seen by anyone, they would either run away or attack him. He had never been sure why they did, only that they would keep screaming demon at him. Which was why he had been so interested in the conversation between the Hokage and his subordinate. Now that he knew that the Kyuubi, the demon fox that had ravaged the village, and Naruto, the little lad who everyone hated, were linked. He didn't know why or how, but he knew that it was. Now that he thought back on everything that had happened to him in just the past 30 minutes, he was amazed. After all, it's not every day you get beaten within an inch of your life, then have a red-eyed shinobi introduce you to a demon hiding inside your stomach. And then being informally inducted into the demon's clan and given access to its power. Well, it just sounded crazy, but there was something he couldn't understand. From what he knew, the evil monster that killed the Yondaime and the arrogant fox inside his belly were the same being. But if this fox was so evil, then why was it taking the time to explain things to Naruto, and even making an effort to be civil to him? It simply didn't make sense, and he wasn't sure what to make of it. Sure, Kyuubi was arrogant and impatient, but it didn't seem like such a bad sort. But then again, he remembered the thing's attitude when it first saw Naruto. That fierce anger, that murderous intent, that couldn't have been faked. But why the sudden change in attitude? He groaned and clutched his head, which was starting to throb. Either that concussion wasn't completely gone, or all that thinking was giving him a headache. Either way, he was hungry, and the loaf was no longer edible. Well, in a pinch, he would eat it, but he could smell something. It was a hot, humid smell, with a spicy punch to it. Whatever it was, it smelled heavenly, and he walked towards it in a daze, captivated in the smell of it. He tripped over the sleeping body of Itachi, which served to shake him out of his daze. Standing up once more, he followed the scent, breaking into a jog and looking from side to side in search of the source of that heavenly aroma. At the other mouth of the alley, he came to a stop. It was close. Whatever was making that smell was right next to him. He looked to his right and saw a small food stand, open to the street. He walked around to the front of the stand to get a better look at it. By now it was late at night, and the stand was closed, but there was still a light on in it. He walked up to the front of the stand, slightly pushing aside the low-hanging flaps that hung from the front of the roof so he could get a better look inside. He saw a bar, with 6 stools lined up in a row in front of it, and a small kitchen behind the bar. There was some kanji written above the bar, but he couldn't read it. But in the small kitchen behind the bar, he saw a pretty girl, no more than 13 years old, set a bowl down on the counter. Naruto's eyes focused on the bowl, and he instantly sensed that the delicious aroma was coming from that bowl. He started to drool at the mere thought of eating it, but managed to contain his hunger as he continued to watch the girl. She had grabbed some kitchen utensils, then turned and went into the back of the kitchen, rounding a corner and going out of sight. Soon Naruto heard water running, and assumed that she was washing the dishes. He couldn't wait any longer. His stomach was sending signals to the brain, demanding that he eat that bowl. What shreds that were left of his conscience hesitated, as he had a soft spot for women and didn't want to steal a girl's dinner, but his stomach overrode it. He ducked under the flaps, not wanting to set off the bell, and ran up to the bowl. He paused for a second, looking at the contents. It was perfect. It was some sort of soup, with a deliciously rich brown texture, and was filled to the brim with long steaming noodles, huge chunks of meat, and hot spices. He could wait no longer. He grabbed the bowl and appended the contents into his mouth, eating half the bowl in one go. He was awestruck by the flavor. Never before had his taste buds been given such a treat before. The broth danced over his tongue, the spices setting his mouth aflame in delicious hotness. The chunks of meat were tender and juicy, and the noodles were heavenly. He set the half-empty bowl down with an ecstatic thump, letting his mouth savor the taste. After he finished swallowing what he had in his mouth, he raised the bowl to his lips and devoured most of what remained. The second mouthful was even more divine than the first. He slowly sipped what was left of the broth, not wanting to end such a fine meal too quickly. However, he had failed to remember the presence of the girl, nor had he noticed the water being turned off. He heard a high-pitched laugh, and he suddenly realized his mistake. He set the bowl down quickly and turned to run, but tripped over his own feet. Stumbling, he fell backwards onto one of the bar stools and landed on the floor with a crash. He tried to get up, but he couldn't seem to find his footing. Then, he heard more laughter, and looked up at the young girl. She was standing next to him, laughing heartily at his predicament. She didn't seem particularly angry or upset, just amused. She knelt down beside him, still chuckling, looking over his ragged appearance. She looked from him to the nearly empty bowl sitting on the counter, and a smile came to her face. She stood up and reached down to the frightened Naruto, offering him a hand up. He gazed at the hand fearfully, frightened that she might be tricking him. Enough villagers had pretended to be nice to him, then try and hurt him, that he was frightened of everybody. She grinned widely, the hand still extended out towards him, her face bright and cheerful. Naruto hesitated one moment longer, then grabbed her hand, allowing himself to be lifted up onto his feet. She hauled him off the ground, setting the small boy on his feet. She patted his head, and gave him a big grin. "So, did you like the ramen?" Naruto started, sheepishly scratching his head. He knew what was coming. She would be nice at first, then get mad at him, then do something to him. He didn't know exactly what, but he knew it wouldn't be fun. Well, might as well get this over with. Yeah, it was great. So, can you hurry up and yell at me so I can go? Naruto braced himself, preparing for the verbal and physical onslaught that was sure to come. But instead of the outrageous anger, there was only another pat on his head and a chuckle. "I'm not gonna yell at you. It was just ramen, after all. Besides, I can always make more. But it was my special recipe I just made, and I wanted to know if you liked it." Naruto was startled by her calm, but was swept away in a rush of ecstasy, as he remembered the delicious soup that had sated his hunger. "Oh yeah? That stuff was awesome. I've never had anything so good." His reaction put a great big grin on her face, and she ruffled his hair happily. "Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it so much. Well, would you like another bowl? Naruto's jaw dropped. His vision went blurry as he stared teary-eyed at the girl. His mouth hung open, and drool slowly dripped out of it. The girl laughed again, then walked back behind the counter. I'm guessing that's a yes. Alrighty, one Ayam-chan's special coming right up. He stared at her as she went into full chef mode, whipping out utensils and ingredients. Her fingers danced over the ingredients, opening this package, unsealing that bottle, dumping this herb in that bowl. In a flash, she had the noodles in the water, which was already coming to a boil. As they soaked, she quickly cut and prepared the meat, adding spices liberally to it. As the noodles finished soaking, she quickly added the meat and seasonings, stirring it rapidly. She added a few more select spices and herbs, and kept stirring it. Then, it was done. Naruto watched the bowl be set before him, watching the girl lay down a pair of chopsticks, watched as she drew up a stool next to him and motioned to the steaming bowl. With a quivering hand, he reached for the chopsticks, grasping them in an inexperienced hand. He fumbled with them, but because all his attention was focused on the bowl in front of him, he found it difficult to use them. Tossing the chopsticks over his shoulder, he grabbed the bowl in both hands and brought it to his lips and appended it into his mouth. Getting about a fourth of the bowl this time, he slowly chewed the meat and noodles, feeling the flavorful broth slosh over his tongue. He swallowed and poured the bowl into his mouth once more. He repeated this until the bowl was empty, and he was patting his small belly in contentment. Wow, that stuff is the best. I've never had something that good before. He picked up the bowl and started licking the insides of it clean, desperate to get all the delicious soup that he could. However, all he got was a whack to the head as the girl grabbed the bowl, shaking her head at him. That's bad manners. I'm glad you liked it so much, but don't lick the bowl. Didn't your mother ever teach you that? She looked at him for a moment, watching his face slowly go from happy to depressed, and he slouched down into his stool. She got worried by this behavior. I know you do have a mother, right? He shook his head despondently, wishing this had never come up. No, I don't have any parents. I live on my own. The girl gasped in sympathy, and she was silent for a second. Okay, where do you live? I can walk you home. She acted quite cheerful for a moment, intent on cheering him up as much as she could. But Naruto only got more depressed, and shoved his hands in his pockets. Don't live anywhere. She looked at him in some amazement. Well, where's your home? Don't you have one? He shook his head again, feeling awful about this whole thing. Nope. Never have. The girl gasped, and brought a hand to her mouth. She was shocked to say the least. She didn't know that people lived without homes. And he didn't have any parents, which made her feel even sorrier for him. She had lost her mom when she was 7, and she couldn't imagine how hard it would be living without her dad as well. She looked at Naruto, examining him closely. Having no family and no home would definitely account for the ragged clothes. He looked malnourished, too, and she could almost see his ribs under his shirt. Her heart panged with sympathy, and she felt sorry for the boy. I know you don't have any family? No one? Naruto looked down, not wanting to meet her eyes as he slowly shook his head. The girl looked at him another moment, then grinned. Okay then. I'm your new sister. Naruto looked up, startled. What, you don't believe me? On the honor of Ichiraku Ramen, I'll be your new sister. That's a promise. Naruto's eyes teared up again, and he hugged her as hard as he could. Tears began flowing down his eyes as he realized how lucky he was today. First, he got a cool tattoo from a fox, then he got an awesome meal, and now he got a new sister. Could this day get any better? And to celebrate this, how about another bowl of ramen? Correction, the day just got better. Naruto melted with joy, still hugging her with every ounce of strength in his scrawny arms. The girl stood there a moment longer, hugging him back as best she could. However, he was a good 2 feet shorter than her, and she had to bend down to do it. She waited for several long moments before poking Naruto in the ribs, trying to get him to let go. He finally did so, and she went into the kitchen to once more work her magic. Naruto sat on the stool once more, mastering his emotions and wiping the tears from his eyes. He felt good. It was a nice feeling, and he was surprised that he felt so good. As far back as he could remember, his life had been cold and harsh. But now, suddenly, things had taken a turn for the better. He profusely thanked whatever god was listening for his good fortune. However, his prayers were interrupted by another bowl being set before him. He reached out towards it, but was stopped by the girl. So, can I know the name of my new little brother? I'm Ayam, by the way. Ichiraku Ayam. She sat down next to him with a bowl of her own in front of her, waiting for his answer. Ano, I'm Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto. Arigato, Ayam Mizan. He reached for the bowl, but again was stopped by Ayam. She laughed at his efforts, and shook her finger at him. Manners, manners. When you meet someone for the first time, you say Hajimashite. Now try again. She cupped her free hand to her ear, waiting for his answer. His face red, he ducked his head, embarrassed despite himself. Ano Hajimashite, Ayam Nizan, can I eat now? Ayam laughed at him again, removing her hand and offering a couple of chopsticks. Sure you can, Naruto, but not like you ate the last bowl. You have to use these chopsticks. Naruto took them and looked at them warily, as if they were intending to attack him. After a long moment, he held a chopstick in each hand and was trying to skewer the chunks of meat with them, but to little success. Ayam saw this and chuckled a little. "No, silly! Here, let me show you how to hold them." She grabbed the chopsticks and demonstrated how to hold them. "And here, this is how you pick them up." She showed him how to grasp the meat and noodles in between the sticks. He was a little confused at first, but managed to hold them correctly. But whenever he tried to grasp something in his bowl, it slipped out of his grasp. Ayam patted his back encouragingly. "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it in no time." She snapped her own chopsticks apart, accompanied by a quick itadakimasu. Sure enough, in a few minutes Naruto had improved dramatically in his chopstick skills, and was using them to chow down on the delicious soup. With his mouth full, he turned to Ayam. "Oh, what's this stuff called?" Ayam bonked him a good one on the back of the hand, and shook a correcting finger at him. "Don't talk with your mouth full, Naruto. It's gross. And it's called ramen. Me and my dad run this stand." Naruto, feeling the small bruise on the back of his head, nodded and went back to his food, too engrossed in eating it to wonder why it was called ramen. He finished his bowl shortly and set his chopsticks carefully in his bowl. He looked at the empty dish in satisfaction, since normally he didn't even eat any kind of supper, much less 3 entire bowls of ramen. He rubbed his stomach softly, feeling its happy gurgling. I am Nizan, why are you being nice to me?" "No one is ever nice to me." Ayam looked at him for a moment, but then her eyes became moist with barely controlled tears. She quickly grabbed the empty ramen bowls and disappeared into the back of the kitchen. She turned on the sink back there and set the dishes into it, staring at them for a moment. Then her control broke, and she grabbed the edge of the sink and cried. She cried hard, hoping that the sound of the running water would drown out any sound that Naruto might hear. But when she saw Naruto look at her with that sad face, and heard him ask her that question, she saw so much sadness and despair in his bright blue eyes. She saw his hurt, his broken hopes, his shattered dreams, his forgotten future. She couldn't take it, she just couldn't bear the pain. Then, she felt something warm latch onto her, and she looked down at it. It was Naruto, gazing up at her with great big tears in his eyes. "Don't cry, I am Nizan. I'm sorry if I made you sad. I'm really, really sorry." Then he broke down and buried his head into her thigh, wailing in unleashed sadness. Ayam's heart nearly broke at the sight, and she knelt down beside him and took him into her arms. She let him cry out all his pain and all his sadness, simply hugging him back. This went on for nigh on 15 minutes, and at the end of it little Naruto was hoarse from crying. Ayam wiped the last of the tears from her eyes as she looked at a small clock in the kitchen. She gasped in horror. "Oh no! I was supposed to be home 30 minutes ago. Oh, I totally forgot. And I still have to close down the stand too." She pouted for a moment, then bustled around the kitchen, cleaning and sorting as quick as she could. Naruto, all tired out from his crying, could only watch in amazement as she whirled about the kitchen like a tornado. Before 5 minutes had passed, the kitchen was spotless. She turned to Naruto and flashed him a victory sign, sticking her tongue out. Naruto gave her a big grin and a high five, and together they left the kitchen. She turned off the lights and locked up the storage shed and kitchen, before walking around to the front of the stand. Reaching up to the top of the low-hanging roof, she grabbed the metal sheet that hung there and drew it down, unrolling it. She brought it all the way to the ground, efficiently covering the front entrance in a sheet of metal. She backed away and observed her handiwork, dusting her hands off as she did so. Naruto flashed her a thumbs up, which she gladly returned. She turned to Naruto, reaching out with a hand and ruffling his hair in a friendly way. "So, where are you off to tonight, little bro?" The big grin remained on his face, but his eyes no longer smiled. "I know a good alley. No worries, I'm set for the night. See ya later, I am Nizan." Ayam was startled for a moment as he turned and ran off down the road. "Naruto! Don't forget to come by tomorrow." Naruto merely waved over his shoulder as he continued running down the street. He turned into a small alley and disappeared from her sight, but not from her thoughts. She gazed at where the small boy had just been, feeling an awful pain in her heart. She resolved to talk to her dad about it tonight, even if he got mad that she was home late. She turned and set off towards her home, her mind still on her newfound blonde brother. The said blonde was currently running at top speed down another road, on his way back to one of his favorite sleeping spots. As he ran, he thought over the events of the night, and remembered the wash of emotions that had swept over him. Suddenly, a voice popped up in the back of his head. "Well, seems like you had a good evening. I presume everything went well." He was wondering why his brain was talking to him for a moment, then realized that it was merely his foxy tenant. "Yeah, tonight was awesome. I had a great new kind of food called ramen, and I met a really nice girl. She made me her little brother. And the ramen was so good. It had these awesome noodles with really nice bits of beef, and the spice was," and he went on and on about this new food he had discovered, with Kyubi listening on in amusement. Apparently, his vessel was in a rare good mood. He thought back to his earlier years of imprisonment under the Shiki Fujin seal, and shuddered. Naruto's mood affects his cage and surrounding environment, and for 2 years now it had been nothing but terrible. Kyubi reflected on those days when all there was sadness and misery in the air, and he hoped those days would never come again. So, for his own sake, he would try to keep the boy out of his depression. He tried to pay attention to Naruto, as it seemed that he was finally winding down his mental tirade. And the best thing about the noodles was probably the way they slithered down your throat, like eating a wet snake. Naruto giggled a little as he thought of eating a wet snake, and pretended to gag in disgust. Kyubi decided it was time to put this conversation on safer footing. I appreciate the fact you like ramen, but enough talking about it. More importantly, you must remember that you are hated by the villagers. Therefore, you must be exceedingly cautious that no one knows that you are on such good terms with this ramen woman. Understand, Kit? Naruto wrinkled his nose in puzzlement. No, not really. Could you explain that? Kyubi sighed, hoping his patience could withstand the force of curiosity that was Naruto. Very well. The villagers dislike you intensely, and, as is often the case with strong emotion, it causes it to lash out at anything connected to you. In this case, it would be this ramen woman. Naruto puzzled through this statement, but still couldn't understand. Kyubi tried again. Perhaps an example is in order. Let us say that you own a house. The villagers hate you, and know that the house is yours. Therefore, they will ruin your house, simply because it belongs to you. Does that help any, Kid? Naruto thought through it, then nodded as it finally clicked in his brain. During this entire mental conversation, he had been getting closer and closer to his favorite sleeping spot, which consisted of a little fort made of cardboard boxes in the southwestern corner of Konoha. He had made the fort when he was 4, hoping that it would keep mean people away. So far, it had worked, and no one had ever found him there. At least, he didn't think so. He rounded the bend in the road and dived into his alley. But something stopped him dead in his tracks, and he glanced cautiously around. There, on the ground in front of him, lay the poor remains of his little cardboard fort. It had been burned down, some pieces missing entirely with others merely getting charred. It was also water-stained in places, and one of the boxes was full of shit. He sniffed the air, and instantly regretted it. The air was full of the stench of human urine, feces and paint. He looked at the wall, seeing graffiti sprayed all over it. For the first time, he was glad he couldn't read, as it was probably something really mean. But there was one thing he managed to understand. It was a picture, and it was a crude drawing of some kind of 4-legged beast with 9 tails. He knew only one creature with 9 tails. He sat down next to the pathetic remnants of his fort, careful not to sit on anything gross. He thought of where to go next, and start flipping through various sleeping spots in Konoha. Hopefully, they had been left alone. Kyubi knew that, despite Naruto's obvious sadness about the fate of his fort, he had to understand what he meant. You see, Kid? It was yours, and they destroyed it. Do not let them destroy anything close to you. That's important, Kid. Naruto nodded, completely understanding what Kyubi meant. However, the fox wasn't done yet. But there is something else you must remember. Do not lose control. We who possess power must not use it badly. Not only will it destroy others, but it will destroy you. Do not make the same mistake I made, Kid. Naruto was intrigued by the last part of the Kyubi's statement. Whoa, what do you mean, the same mistake you did? What happened? Kyubi merely ignored him, and Naruto gave up on getting an answer out of the enigmatic fox. He turned away from the pitiful remains of his favorite fort and ran off, going to one of his other sleeping places. It wasn't long before he got there. Soon he was standing before an old abandoned shed, which was thankfully not found by his tormentors. He didn't like to sleep here too often because it was a little creepy, and he was still afraid of the dark. However, he steeled his nerves and walked inside the dark shed, his tiny fists clenched as he fought his fear down. He crossed the empty room to the ragged blanket. He grabbed it and spread it out on the ground to serve as a sort of mattress. Lying himself down on his makeshift pallet, he slowly drifted off to sleep, his mind plagued by memories of the day. When he was asleep, a figure dropped from the ceiling of the shed, landing on the old floor without a sound. He stalked up to Naruto and looked at him. There was just enough light that one could see his face, which was contorted in rage and hate. His Konoha Hittite was visible on his forehead, and his vest and attire revealed his jounin rank. He reached down to his shuriken holster and withdrew a particularly nasty kunai, curved and jagged-edged, which dripped with poison. Taking this dagger, he knelt over Naruto, bringing his kunai to Naruto's throat. A flash of glee crossed his face as he prepared to take the life of the demon. He took a moment before he killed the boy, remembering what had happened 5 years ago. He remembered seeing his fiancée die, ripped in half by one of the Kyubi's enormous claws. His father, too, had died in the battle. One of the 9 tails had swept him into the air, impaling him on a sharp rock. He remembered hearing the news that the Kyubi had been sealed away in the kid, and felt again the old hatred. He bore no particular ill will against the boy, only the demon that dwelt within him. Well, no more. The demon would die by his hand, and its vessel as well. His eyes gleamed with a murderous intent, and his lips curled up in a grotesque snarl. Suddenly, there was a small thump sound, and the jounin jerked upright. His face passed from anger, to surprise, to sadness. He fell onto his side, panting for breath as blood dribbled down his lips. In his back was a standard kunai, buried up to its ring in his back, just behind his heart. Using his fading strength, he threw the poisoned kunai in his hand in the direction of his attacker, hoping to hit him. However, the kunai was snatched out of the air by his assailant, and the shadowy figure of his attacker came closer and closer. Then, he stood directly above the critically injured jounin, just looking at him. The jounin could make out his face, now, and gasped in horror. There, in front of him, was Uchiha Itachi, the poisoned custom kunai dangling from his fingers. He couldn't react as Itachi knelt next to him, looking closely at the kunai, then at the sleeping Naruto on the ground next to them. When he looked back at the jounin, his eyes were full of malice. The jounin gulped, swallowing his own blood, and tried to calm down the furious Uchiha. "Ano, Itachi-san, just relax. I'm doing you a favor, okay? The sooner we get this demon kid off our hands the better, right?" Itachi had had enough, and a hand snapped forward, grasping the fallen jounin by the neck and lifting him into the air. Itachi stood up, carrying the unfortunate ninja with him, who was struggling to breathe. Itachi then took the poisoned kunai that was meant to be the death of Naruto, and brought it to the man's neck. The jounin's eyes bulged, and his face became a pale white, tinged with blue due to his lack of air. Itachi then began sawing into the man's jugular, the skin bursting before the jagged edges of the blade. The man tried to scream as he saw his lifeblood gushing from his veins. Itachi, slowly being covered in the jounin's blood, drew the curved kunai away from the man, dropping him face first onto the floor. The blood pooled and flowed about the floor, as the man slowly died from blood loss. Itachi, deciding to end things, lifted his foot and stomped hard on the kunai jutting from the man's back, shoving it through his chest and the floor underneath him. The jounin gasped one final time as his heart burst after being pierced by Itachi's kunai, then slumped against the ground, motionless. Itachi looked at the corpse on the floor before throwing the jagged kunai against the hard wood of the wall. He reached down and grabbed Naruto, picking him up off the floor and holding him in the air. Naruto mumbled in his sleep and slowly woke up, blinking and staring at Itachi. His mouth opened, about to say something, when Itachi's Sharingan flashed into life, drowning Naruto in its crimson glow. Naruto slumped into unconsciousness, and he knew no more. Naruto awoke slowly, feeling groggy and tired. He felt like he had been sleeping forever, but he didn't care. He turned over and curled himself into a ball, snuggling against the warm mattress. This was definitely a wait a minute. Mattress? He hadn't slept on a mattress in 2 years, and even back in the orphanage he had mostly slept on a blanket spread on the floor. But he was in one no, a coverlet over him, warming his entire body. Despite his confusion, he relaxed into it, loving the feel of comfort it gave him. But his curiosity couldn't wait very long. Time to figure out where he was. He opened his eyes, glancing around him, trying to absorb every detail at once. He was in a moderately sized room, with bare, unadorned walls and a large sliding door directly in front of him. He looked behind him, and recoiled in sudden shock. There, emblazoned boldly on the wall behind the pallet, was the red and white fan of the Uchiha clan. His mind whirled, wondering why it was there. Then, he remembered Itachi picking him up. Of course, this must be Itachi-san's room. He abandoned his comfortable position, raising himself up on one arm to get a better view of his surroundings. There was hardly any furniture besides the mattress on the floor, merely a small dresser against one wall and a couple of cushions laid upon the floor. Against the corner of the wall lay a large beanbag, which was the typical black and red of the Uchiha family. Shoving aside the comforter that covered him, he stood up, wondering what he should do now. He could leave the room, and try to find Itachi-san, but that didn't seem like such a great idea. Wandering around by himself in the Uchiha family house was probably a short step from suicide, seeing as how some of their members had gone out of their way to harass him. He cradled his chin in his hand, still clueless as to his next course of action. Then someone slid open the door and Naruto prepared to run. If it was anyone other than Itachi, it was probably a good idea to get as far away as possible, consequences be damned. When the door slid all the way open, he saw, much to his relief, that it was Itachi. He relaxed, and watched the older boy step inside and carefully shut the door. Itachi turned around, black eyes looking deep into Naruto's own. Naruto, as always, let his curiosity go before his caution. "Hey Itachi-san. Why am I here? I was gonna sleep in the shed last night." Itachi merely shook his head and walked across the room, flopping himself down on the beanbag in the corner. "I think, Uzumaki-kun, that you will find that shed of yours no longer in existence. It was burned to the ground last night." Naruto gasped, wondering how it could have happened. The last thing he remembered was his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Did you do it?" Itachi waved a hand airily, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Of course. I thought it quite apparent. It was the wisest course of action, especially considering your guest." Naruto got angry at Itachi's presumption to burn down his second favorite sleeping spot, but then mentally reviewed the second sentence. "Guest? What do you mean, guest? There was nobody there except me." Itachi growled a little under his breath, remembering the despicable actions of the jounin the night before. "Again, you are mistaken. You did indeed have a guest, and a very nasty one. He bore you a personal grudge, it seemed. I dispatched him. Naruto stared at the young teen in front of him, who was so calmly talking about killing someone. You killed him? How could you kill him? That's just. He brought a hand to his mouth, feeling sick and queasy. Across the room, Itachi's head had snapped up and he glared at Naruto with a ferocious intensity, his eyes blazing with the Sharingan. Yes. Yes, I killed him. Or would you rather I have let him cut your throat as you slept? Naruto was shocked, and tried to interrupt Itachi, but Itachi couldn't have cared less, and continued talking unperturbed. I am a ninja. It is what I am trained to do. I will kill, I will steal, I will deceive, I will torture, I will destroy, and I will not be stopped. That is my way, and I follow it. If I had not followed the path I had chosen, you would be a corpse right now, your poisoned blood still flowing onto the floor of that shed. Remember that, brat. You owe your life to a ninja. Throughout his entire speech, Itachi maintained a frigid tone and calm posture, his voice calm and emotionless. "I'm sorry, Itachi. I wasn't trying to get you mad." Naruto was almost cowering now, trying to move away from the source of the red-hot glare. Itachi maintained his gaze for a second longer, and then looked away. He was disappointed in his loss of control, wondering why he had let himself get worked up over this boy. Shaking it off, he turned back towards Naruto while getting into a more comfortable position on the beanbag. "No, it's not your fault, Uzumaki. It's mine. After I eliminated the man, I grabbed you and carried you back here, setting the shed afire to remove most of the traces we left behind. It shouldn't arouse much suspicion, but it's possible they can link the fire back to me." Naruto's eyes widened. "How could they tell that you set the fire? I mean, everything should be all burned up, right?" Itachi shook his head solemnly. "Yes, most everything should have burned away. However, they can test the ashes for chakra residue. I had used a basic Kikyaku no Jutsu to set the shed ablaze, and they can identify the use of chakra if they look close enough. They can also tell that a body had been inside, since the ash of wood and the ash of bone are quite different to those who know." He glanced at Naruto, trying to ascertain how much of that the boy had actually understood. To his surprise, Naruto was nodding in understanding, having apparently got down the gist of his statement. "Okay, then what are we gonna do now? Am I going to stay here?" Itachi again shook his head, not even bothering to ponder that question. "No, that is out of the question. I'm afraid my clansmen don't have much of a liking for you at the present. However, there is an alternative solution." Naruto's nose wrinkled, obviously considering Itachi's view of the disposition of the Uchihas as being absolutely accurate. "Okay, what do you want me to do?" Itachi leaned forward on his beanbag, his hands idly flexing. "Simply this, nothing." Naruto's mouth dropped open, and he was about to ask Itachi what the hell he was talking about, when Itachi held up a hand, forestalling his interruption. "I wasn't finished. You will continue doing whatever you did before, simply with more caution and more vigilance. Constant vigilance will keep you safe, and little else. In the time when I am not on missions, I will do what I can to teach you survival skills. You have already shown yourself something of a natural genius in that so far, being able to survive on the streets at such a young age. But the fact remains that were it not for the Kyuubi, you would not be alive. We shall have to remedy that situation." He stood up from his beanbag and began pacing around the room, counting off ideas as he went. "Because you play host to Kyuubi, your chakra will no doubt be incredibly high, and should grow even higher as time passes. Therefore, we must begin basic chakra control exercises immediately, and constantly, so that you do not fall behind in your control. The more chakra one has, the harder it is to maintain control. You have some natural stealth abilities, as well as your uncanny ability to become unnoticed. That is not something that can be trained, per se, but it can be practiced. Your hand-eye coordination is incredible for a child your age, and your vision is perfect." Naruto was watching him in awe, not really understanding most of the things he was saying. Whatever it was, it sounded cool. Naruto gave a foxy grin and settled down for the long haul. It looked like Itachi was going to take a while. "You are short now, but your body type will undoubtedly be built for power, rather than speed. So I must begin teaching you the fundamental offensive capabilities of taijutsu. A weapon I cannot give you, for there will be trouble if a 5-year-old is found with a kunai. But what I can give you is wooden shuriken, which you will use to practice with. I expect you to practice with them daily. I shall start you on a basic jutsu, but not one of those they will teach you at the academy. No, I think something far more chakra-consuming would be to your benefit, seeing as you have so much to spare. I will have to teach you the 3 basic jutsu as well, but I do not know if you will have the control for it. Hopefully, within a few months, you will have progressed far enough that we can begin the tree walking." Itachi took a deep breath, and was showing every sign of wanting to continue, but was distracted from it by Naruto's strange expression. "Uzumaki? What is it?" Naruto stared at him, a mix of confusion, fear, and hope mingling in his eyes. "Ano, you said you would teach me. Does that mean you'll be my friend?" He looked up with the hope shining from his eyes, but behind it lurked a fear. Fear that he would be rejected, just like all those other times. Itachi looked the boy straight in the eyes, then instantly regretted it. The boy's gaze was like an arrow, piercing his heart, making him nearly weep in sympathy for the lad. He saw how alone Naruto was, and how he so badly wanted a friend. Itachi steeled himself. It had to be done. He walked up to Naruto, squatting down before the blonde and looked the boy straight in the eye. No, he saw the hope drain away, being replaced by an awful sadness that tore at the heartstrings. But before Naruto could shed any tears, he reached out and touched the boy's shoulder. I'll be your teacher. I do not lightly give away my friendship. But I will allow you the chance to earn it. Slowly, hope began to dawn once more in the boy's eyes, and Itachi gave him a rare grin. Not a smirk, not a sneer, a cheerful grin. This provoked a foxy smile from the blonde, who wiped his eyes roughly with the back of his hand, rubbing his tears away. Arigato, Itachi-sensei. I won't let you down. Itachi smiled at the boy. He had no doubt that he would not let him down. And if he did well, there would be hell to pay. Naruto. The boy looked up at him, eyes wide. I will not go easy on you. I am expecting you to train in every spare moment you have. Unless you want the next assassination attempt to succeed, you will work as hard as you can. When I am gone on missions, you will practice on your own. If you do not display sufficient improvement by my return, your lessons stop permanently. There will be no second chances, for your enemies will give you none either. Are we clear? Naruto, understanding the rules that Itachi had laid down, nodded emphatically. Itachi rose from his squat. Excellent. We begin your training tomorrow. Take today and rest, but be ready for work tomorrow. Naruto nodded and stood up, brushing dust off the knees of his threadbare pants. Itachi looked him over, and briefly resolved to get the boy new clothes. It would look bad if he let his students dress in rags, and he didn't want his reputation tarnished by a filthy pupil. He led the lad to the window of the room, opening it wide. He motioned the lad to go through it, and he did, Itachi following at his heels. They climbed up to the top of the house, and Itachi looked at Naruto once more. Naruto. The blonde turned his gaze towards him, tilting his head in query. Time for your first test. I'm putting a genjutsu on you, which will make you relatively invisible. However, it only lasts 90 seconds. You will have to get out of the Uchiha district before time is out, or you fail or die, possibly both. Understood? Naruto gulped and nodded. Itachi hadn't been kidding when he told Naruto how serious he was. Itachi brought his hands together into a simple seal, gathering chakra around Naruto. In the blink of an eye, the genjutsu had taken effect, removing Naruto from sight. Itachi could still see a rough outline of the boy, though black against the blue of the sky. And the air within the outline was strangely textured, constantly swirling and moving. He nodded in acceptance of the genjutsu's effect, and stood back, pointing towards the farthest exit from the Uchiha district. After all, why make this easy on the lad? He was sure Naruto would thank him later. Naruto set off in the chosen direction, small legs pumping as he ran across the rooftops. Quickly, he discovered Itachi's reason behind this test. Not only was it testing his speed with the time limit, but it was testing his balance. Some of the roof tiles were slippery, some were loose, and all were slanted and rounded. It was hard to run across them quickly while maintaining his balance at the same time. Several times he almost fell off the roofs entirely, and once he found himself at a dead end. He had to double back and take a different route, this time making sure he didn't run out of roof. He finally made it to the gate, panting and wheezing as he tried to breathe. He was out of the Uchiha district, and he had 13 seconds to spare. He hadn't failed Itachi-sensei's test. He rolled the word around in his mouth, thinking about it carefully. Itachi-sensei. It felt strange calling someone his sensei, but if he could call anyone that, he would call Itachi that. It was almost like the feeling he got when he called Ayame-san. It felt good, but a little strange too. He hoped the strangeness of it would fade with time, but he wasn't sure about that. After all, he'd always been alone. Maybe he would never get used to having people. He cleared his mind of those thoughts and began walking down the road, towards downtown Konoha. He knew of a few good alleys along the way he could go to, get some more sleep. Or, he could go ahead and grab his lunch. Wait, lunch? Or supper? He looked at the sky and noticed that the sun had gone down, not up, since the last time he'd seen it. He had gone to sleep at about something like midnight last night. And, since the sun was going down again, he calculated it in his head, and decided that he had slept a good 16 hours. This surprised him a great deal, because normally he never slept more than 5 or 6 hours. He couldn't afford to sleep longer than that. He decided to wait a bit on his food, and instead he turned his mind towards his clothes. He'd been wearing the same set of clothes for a little over a year, and he had just about worn them out. Which meant it was time for another store raid. He sighed, shoving his hands into his threadbare pockets, and turned down an alley. He needed some clothes that he could train in, because Itachi had promised to teach him to be a ninja. A thrill ran through him as he thought of that, thinking of joining the ranks of those black-clad fighters. He remembered a sparring match he had seen once, between a couple of A and BU members. He had watched them exchange blow after blow, counter after counter, both seeming to be able to attack and defend instantly. He had been floored by the sheer amount of skill and power they had displayed, and was entranced by their swift motions and seamless fighting style. He wanted to be a ninja. He realized that no. But he had never thought it possible. After all, almost everyone in the village seemed to hate him, and he didn't think anyone would be willing to help him become a ninja. But now Itachi-sensei was going to teach him, and he could tell that Itachi was a good ninja. He grinned as he thought of himself wearing the hetaite that graced the foreheads of so many shinobi, and hoped one day to wear the leaf symbol proudly, as a ninja of Konoha. Plus, Kyubi was gonna help him. He frowned for a moment as he thought of Kyubi. The fox had been completely silent since the previous night, and he wondered why he wasn't talking to him, like they had done the previous night. "Hey, Baekitsune. You there?" he yelled within the depths of his head. He heard nothing but the echoes of his cry. He tried again, this time even louder, but there was still no reply. He sighed a little in frustration. He hoped that the fox had good intentions. One thing was for sure, he didn't want to get on a giant fox demon's bad side. Besides, it's not like the demon was going anywhere, that was for sure. He found a cardboard box in an alley. He looked at it critically, then decided that it would do for now. He dragged a nearby bag of fresh trash over to it, and put it inside, making himself a cushioned chair. Admittedly, a nasty-smelling, dirty and disgusting one, but cushioned nonetheless. He sat down, getting himself comfortable. He had a lot to think about, and wanted to be alone for a while. A few hours passed, and the sun had dropped behind the great wall that surrounded Konoha. Naruto looked out of the two ends of his little alley, pleased to see the flow of people going to and from downtown was dying down. The perfect time to find himself some new clothes would be soon, just after the stores are closed, but just before the nighttime prowlers come out to play. He got up off his makeshift chair, not caring about the foul smells coming from it. He'd smelled worse, and had learned to just ignore it. He walked slowly to one end of the alley, looking carefully down the street. It was mostly empty. There were a few vendors who were still packing up their carts, and a few stragglers from the tourist crowd. He thought for a moment, and then decided to take his chances leaving now. It would be better than going too late, and getting caught by one of the local gangs. They wouldn't just beat him, they would kill him. He left the alley, sticking close to the shadows as best as he could. This was where his natural talents came into play. Over years he had developed a knack for disappearing from sight, to becoming part of the scenery. People would look at him and not even see him, because their minds simply didn't register him. He wasn't sure why, but it worked for him, and allowed him to go on these excursions with quite a bit more safety than he would have had otherwise. But however good at being inconspicuous he was, that wouldn't hold out unless he was careful to not be seen in the first place. Stalking quietly down the darkening streets, he reached the area he was looking for. This was a popular part of town, where some of the famous Fire Country tailors had their shops. They specialized in embroidery and fancy designs, but their ninja wear was some of the finest in the 5 villages, second only to the Mizukure battle gear. There was one shop in particular that dealt in only ninja gear, and it was that shop that drew Naruto's interest that night. If he could get inside, find some decent gear, and then get out safely, then he could go and meet Ayame before she closed her stall. Ignoring the sudden growling in his stomach at the thought of ramen, he carefully snuck to the side of the store, peering cautiously into one of its windows. There was no one there, and the lights were off. That meant that he could strike now with relative safety. He prowled quietly over to the door, looking anxiously left and right. Seeing no one, he reached into a pocket and pulled out a small piece of tough wire. He carefully inserted this into the lock, getting a feel for the position of its tumblers. He suppressed a smirk. Such a basic lock on such a fancy place. He thought it was his lucky day, but then sobered quickly as a thought struck him. This place sold ninja gear, so maybe it was booby-trapped. He wouldn't put it past the shop owner to do something like that. He walked over to the window, looking carefully inside. Nope, no good, he couldn't see anything. He turned away from the window, thinking hard. He didn't have a flashlight, and it almost certainly was a bad idea to force the lock on a ninja shop. Well, not until he had made sure there were no nasty surprises. There wasn't anything on the lock itself, and the shopkeeper definitely wouldn't use anything explosive. Poison gas, maybe? Or some kind of knockout gas. Either way, it would probably be a tripwire setup, strung along the floor or next to the door. No, probably on the floor. Putting it on the door was just not practical. Well, assuming he was correct, that meant he would have to have some sort of light, so he could see what he was doing. He pondered the dilemma for a bit longer, the sun finally setting over the horizon. As the twilight slowly gave way to darkness, the street lamps came on, glowing orange. He looked up at the nearest one, and was struck with a sudden inspiration. The nearest lamp was very near the shop, which meant that the light was shining through the shop windows. He rushed to the large window, peering intently into the shop. The light was just enough that he could see the floor, and he thought he saw the glint of wire. He grimaced slightly. He hated it when he was right. Moving away from the window, he looked around hurriedly for something with which he could reflect the light, which would let him see where all the wires were. He found a fragment of a mirror in an alley near the shop, probably the remnants of one of those full-length mirrors they used to see how well the clothes fit. Holding it gingerly, so as not to cut himself from the sharp edges, he moved over to the window once more. He held it at an angle, so that the light from the lamp struck the mirror and reflected, providing him with a makeshift flashlight. Tilting the reflective fragment, he shone the beam of light across the floor, looking for more tripwires. He found 4, 3 of which were strung along the floor. There was a complex-looking seal on the cash register, presumably some kind of advanced locking seal. He didn't really care though, since he wasn't interested in taking cash. He may be a thief, but he didn't feel comfortable with stealing money. He was hesitant to take that final step. Finishing his examination of the innards of the shop, he set the fragment on the ground next to the window. Walking back over to the door, he pulled out his wire again. He stuck it in once more, perusing the innards until he knew it like he knew his name. He withdrew the wire and began twisting and shaping it, molding it into the rough shape he would need to get the door open. He inserted his makeshift lock-pick into the hole once more, wiggling it around in an attempt to slip the tumblers into position. He failed, and let out a quiet curse. He tried again and again, finally getting it on his 5th try. Pocketing his wire once more, he slid the door open and quickly went inside, shutting the door behind him. He looked around at the dark shop. The light from the street lamp was not shining enough through the windows, and he couldn't see the tripwires. He closed his eyes, envisioning where he had seen them. Cautiously, he stepped forward, very slowly and carefully. He didn't want to trip them off, after all the effort he did to discover them. He came to the spot where he remembered the first one lay, strung across the walkway at ankle height. 6 or 7 inches past it, and slightly higher, should be a second one, set so that if one managed to step over it on accident, they would hit the second one. He lifted his leg up, and carried it over the taut wires. When he felt nothing give way, he sighed in relief, and brought his other leg over the wires as well. He stood straight, breathing hard. He was nervous, and he was letting it get to him. He tried to calm down, and managed to slow his breathing and bring his thoughts under control. But his hands were still shaking uncontrollably, and he still had that nameless fear one has when doing something risky or dangerous. Swallowing his senseless fear, he stepped forward once more, searching his memory for the location of the 3rd ground level wire. He remembered that the 3rd and 4th wires were strung along the same lengths, but at different heights, so he would have to crouch as he went between them. He searched his memory diligently, hoping he could remember. He finally found what he sought, and knew that the wires were no more than 2 feet in front of him. One of them was strung along the floor, coming to the middle of his shin. The second one was strung where a normal man's chest would be, but in this case it was at Naruto's head. Carefully, now, he stepped forward, anxious to not hit these wires. He ducked his head down, effectively removing the threat of the top wire. But there was still the bottom one to be contended with. Bringing his leg up and over it, he began to set it on the other side. Suddenly, he heard a bark in his head. "No! Don't step there, Kit!" He jerked back, almost hitting the wires as he stumbled away from them. He was shocked. He hadn't been expecting the fox, and in truth he had almost forgot him entirely. "What the hell? I was over the wire. And why did you have to interrupt me?" I was in the mid. He was cut off from his indignant tirade by a loud roar, which caused him to cower, even though it was only in his head. "Shut your mouth, brat. You show yourself no more than a mere brat. Now be silent and listen to my words." Naruto shut his mouth, deciding it was probably a good idea to not infuriate a millennia-old fox demon, even if it lived in his stomach. There was a grunt of approval from within the depths of his mind. "Good, at least you show some restraint. As for your nearly fatal mistake, perhaps it is better to show you." Naruto wondered what the fox meant by that, but then felt a burning sensation in his belly. He clutched at it through the threadbare fabric of his t-shirt, wondering what the fox was up to. The fiery feeling began spreading, going up along his back. He shuddered as he felt it crawling along his spine, and was getting quite scared. When it reached his head, it seemed to gather, swirling and coiling around within his skull. Then, with the suddenness of an explosion, it all was poured into his eyes. He nearly screamed, biting his lip instead, screwing his eyes shut as he felt them burn in their sockets. He felt like the heat was slamming into the back of his eyes, which throbbed and ached with immense pain. His eyes began tearing up in an effort to cool it, but the tears which fell from them were steaming hot. He gasped aloud in fresh pain as he felt the boiling tears scorch the surface of his skin, leaving trails of small burns down his face. He pressed his eyes into the palms of his hands, willing the pain to leave. Almost immediately it did, the feeling subsiding, returning to its former place within his belly. There was a dull throbbing in his eyes, but he could withstand that. He felt the pain from the burns on his face begin to fade as well as the pain in his lip. Despite the relief that flooded him now, he was still frightened by the whole thing, and wanted explanations badly. And he knew of one person who could give him those explanations. What the hell was that, damn fox? That really hurt. Why, there was a feral snarl, which again shut Naruto up. "In Enma's name, be silent. I will not tolerate another outburst. Understand?" Naruto couldn't bring himself to say anything, but merely nodded meekly. A sigh came from within the caverns of his mind. "Better. You may be a young pup still, but you will not be a foolish one. I will not allow it. Open your eyes, Kit. Open them now." Naruto hesitated for a moment, afraid that the pain would come back if he opened his eyes. The Kyuubi noticed this hesitation. Kit, I gave you an order. Either carry it out, or suffer the consequences. Naruto gulped, not liking the way the fox had said consequences. He opened his eyes warily, still afraid of the return of that burning feeling. Nothing happened, though, and he sighed in relief. That was something he never wanted to go through again. He glanced around the store, glad to see that he hadn't accidentally tripped one of the wires. Wait a second, how could he see? It was pitch dark inside, and why was everything black and white? He grabbed his t-shirt, looking at the red spiral on the front of it. Somehow, the spiral was just a shade of gray. He let go of his shirt, now thoroughly confused. Hey, Fox. How come everything is black and white? I feel like I'm in some old movie or something. He looked around again, realizing something else was amiss. Then he realized. And how can I see in the dark? That doesn't make any sense. What's going on? Kyuubi sighed, exasperated at always having to explain things to this kid. It's simple, boy. I'm a fox. Not only a fox, but a demon fox. Did you expect that you would be normal, despite the fact you are my vessel? Kik, you gave up your normality when you agreed to accept my power. Naruto's eyes widened. He remembered now. He had agreed to accept Kyuubi's power. In essence, he had surrendered his body to the fox, with no strings attached. He gasped as he realized the precarious position he had placed himself in. He had given a demon permission to alter and change him, in any way that things saw fit. He had even helped him by changing the seal on the gates. What if the fox was planning to escape, or to kill Naruto? Of course, the Kyuubi was listening in on these thoughts. One aspect of the seal he had replaced the Shiki Fujin with was that he had full access to the boy's conscious thought. Ah, understanding dawns at last, I see. Kit, if you ever make such a stupid deal as last night again, I will kill you myself. There was a sigh from the fox. Well, even though I would indeed do whatever I could to break free under normal conditions, I cannot break my oath. Consider yourself lucky, Kit, to have such a mighty guardian as that one was watching over you. Naruto was puzzled, and he furrowed his brow in thought. What guardian was he talking about? He didn't quite understand what the fox was trying to say. Ano, what do you mean? I've never had a guardian. The nearest thing to that was Sandai Majizan. And I haven't even seen him in 2 years. The fox muttered something under his breath that Naruto couldn't quite catch, and then proceeded to explain. The guardian I spoke of was the Yondaime Hokage donor. The only man to ever defeat me in face-to-face combat. Were he not immortal, he would have earned my title as the Lord of the East, and allowed to lead the Kitsune clan. There was a deep, throaty sigh. It was he who sealed me into you. In the final moments of his life, he spoke to me, threatened me to an eternity of void, of nothing. He offered to prevent that, to seal me in such a fashion that I would be granted a quick death. I, more than any other, know the pains that can come from eternal life. To be trapped in that black pit the rest of my life, such a thing was abhorrent to me. I chose to accept his terms, and be bound to a Jinchuriki, a vessel. Inside my container, I would live my days, and eventually be absorbed completely into my vessel. I would die when my vessel died. He paused for a moment, mulling things over in his head. I accepted those terms, but then he propositioned a few more, which I found strange. One of these was to swear never to harm my vessel, and never try to impede his progress in any way. This was, of course, easily done. I was no more anxious to die than he was. He also commanded me to offer you this choice, either to grow powerful with my aid, or on your own. This was a strange request, but I agreed to it readily enough. There was a chuckle. So very human of him, I must say. He did an excellent job of wording his commands so I could find no loophole. Over time, I discovered a few and contemplated using them, but then decided it was best not to. If something were to go wrong, both of us would die. Indeed, it was quite fortunate for you, Kit, that Itachi decided to show you to me. That boy understands what true power is. Naruto had been sitting on the floor of the shop, just listening with rapt attention to all that the Kitsune had said. Some of it he found hard to believe, and others he didn't want to believe. But throughout it all, a sense of awe had permeated him. The Yondaime Hokage had given him this burden. He had been cursed with this demon by the very man he had the greatest respect for. He felt a throbbing in his heart, and he saw his hero in a different light than he always had. But then he thought of the last wishes of that famous ninja. Why would he care whether or not Naruto grew in strength? Why did he offer Kyuubi the chance for death, when he could have sent the demon to eternal imprisonment? And why wasn't Naruto told about any of this? So many thoughts were whirling through his head that he was dazed, and felt faint from the pressure. Kyuubi was observing his container, looking through the various emotions that swept through him, and reading some of his thoughts. The boy was most certainly interesting, and he was glad that the Yondaime had sealed him into a container with such raw potential. Yes, the boy was dull and slow, but beneath sluggish motions of his normal thoughts lay an intricate network of instinctive reactions and logical thought. This boy would be intelligent one day, and he was a born shinobi. He had explored the boy's body the previous day, when he had gripped the lad in his chakra. His muscles were already strong, if a bit malnourished, and he showed every signs of being exceptionally strong and fast as he grew. It might be worth his time to not only give the brat power, but teach him some things as well. After all, with such an incredible store of knowledge that the QB had, he could easily instruct the lad in any number of things. But the kid would have to earn such treatment. He hadn't lived this long by simply dishing out his secrets left and right. The boy must show that he was worthy. Naruto interrupted the line of QB's thought with a question. What does this have to do with my eyes? How come I can see like this? QB sighed, realizing that he hadn't really explained what was happening, only telling the boy why. You are a vessel to a greater demon, boy. I'm merely making your body worthy of holding me. I spent quite a bit of the day considering what changes should be made, and exactly when it will happen. Allow me to explain it in terms you will understand. The seal we inserted in place of the old one is constructed so that my chakra is given to you slowly, over a period of time. It can be taken sooner, but that is dangerous for both of us. If one of us tries to force it open, it will break apart, releasing all the chakra held within. Therefore, to ensure relative safety in that area, I have installed into it a series of chakra gates, which each contain 1 year's worth of chakra. The amount within that specific gate will be given to you gradually throughout the year. That means that each year, you will gain a set amount, and no more. Naruto nodded, a little confused but managing to understand the gist of it. QB continued his explanations, knowing that it had to be done, but not liking it much. This first year will contain most of the changes I'm making to your body, Kit. I want you to get used to them as quickly as possible, so that you can learn to use the modifications instinctively. I don't feel like explaining that right now, so you'll find out what they are as you earn them. The first modification was to your eyesight. Congratulations, boy, you possess my eyes. Naruto was startled, not quite understanding what he meant. Don't worry, Kit. You'll see what I mean soon enough. For now, look again at that wire that you were going to step over. Get what you came for and get out. The presence of the fox faded back into the corners of his mind, watching Naruto. It felt a little creepy, but he would get used to it. Using his new vision, he looked down at the wire like QB had ordered him to. He looked at it, gray against the lighter shade of the floor. His eyes widened as he saw something else. Between the two wires was a third one, shaded black. He realized what had happened. The shopkeeper had set up the first and second traps in preparation for this third trap. By using 4 regular wires, it tricked the people into thinking that he would only use regular wire in his traps, not non-reflective wire. And it was set so that anyone walking away from the second trap would definitely hit it. Naruto's eyes traced the line, following it to a corner of the wall. There was a nasty kunai launcher there, and the black blade had traces of gray liquid. He was positive it was a poison of some kind, and was particularly glad that QB had seen fit to warn him. Carefully, he went through the second trap just as he had done before. Except that this time, he ducked his head even lower, getting underneath the camouflage tripwire. He was past it, and apparently was home free. He walked quickly to a section of the store where they kept ninja gear, looking through it until he found a section with small clothes. They were probably for genin, but there were a few that were close enough to Naruto's size. He selected a pair of black shinobi pants, with a few slots on them for kunai or other weapons. They had cargo pockets as well, and could be sealed with chakra to make the pockets watertight. Of course, he didn't even really know what chakra was, much less how to control it. The pants were a size too big for him, but he would grow into it. He selected a set of underarmor, which was a little big for him, but not too much so. He looked around for a shirt, wanting to replace the shabby one that he wore. He finally found one that was almost his size, but a size and a half too big. He would wear it anyways, and hoped that he would grow into that as well. It was just a basic black shirt, but expensive. It was made of silk. The handy thing about silk is that it was a quiet material, and if someone stabbed you through a silk shirt, the silk would bunch up around the blade. This made it a lot easier to pull out the blade. Of course, he didn't know this, but he thought it looked pretty cool. He changed into the clothes quickly, wanting to see how they fit. To his disappointment, the sleeves on his shirt came down past his hands, and his pants gathered around his knees. The pants were quite loose, and he had to hold them up with his hands. The underarmor was all right, despite it being a little loose instead of tight against the skin. He changed back into his old clothes, and decided to take his haul to Itachi. If anyone could help him with those clothes, it was probably him. Naruto quickly made his way out of the store once more, careful to avoid all the traps as he went. He made sure to lock the door, so that the shop owner would hopefully not notice anything. Holding his new clothes under his arm, he ran swiftly away from the store, the sky dark overhead. It was now night, and it was at least past 9. He ducked into an alley near the store, hoping that no one saw him. Once he was there, he panted a little bit, the adrenaline still pumping from excitement. His eyes, which were still monochromatic, began aching more. It made him wince, but it faded quickly. When it faded completely, he saw his vision revert from his previous night vision to his original normal sight. He sighed in relief, happy to once more see in colors, but missing the night vision the other pair gave him. He was a little disappointed he couldn't have both, but at least he could choose between the two visions. One thing was for sure, he didn't want to see in white and black permanently. His adrenaline rush started to fade. After a short time, he began feeling tired and hungry. Hungry food. He remembered that Mizan wanted to see him tonight, and it was about the same time as he saw her last time. He closed his eyes and pulled up his mental map of Konoha, which he had spent the last 2 years developing. He knew where he was, but where was that ramen stand? There. Not too far away, only a couple of blocks. He turned and ran down the alley, careful not to drop his cargo of clothes. He stopped at the mouth of the alley, looking for people. Seeing none, he turned and sprinted down the street, thinking of ramen. Very shortly he arrived, led by the smell of ramen. The same spicy aroma danced about his nostrils, setting him drooling in anticipation. He dropped his load of clothes onto the street, and kicked them inside the ramen stand. He shoved the flaps of the small shop aside, hearing the bell ring to announce his arrival. He didn't see anyone at the counter, but the lights were still on, which meant that someone was still there. And there was a bowl of ramen sitting on the counter, with a little sign on it. It had some kanji scribbled on it, but Naruto couldn't read it. He didn't want to either, as the ramen commanded total and absolute attention. He snuck towards it, hands outstretched, absolutely entranced by its sheer glory and majesty. A shaking hand stretched out, fingers twitched in eagerness, his nostrils flared in appreciation of the delicious aroma. Then he felt something hit his hand hard, making a thwack sound as it struck his flesh. He cried out and packed away, rubbing his stinging hand. He looked at his assailant, who was glaring at him. It was an old man, spatula in hand, wearing a white hat and a white apron. The man was quivering with righteous indignation, and his eyes were cold. Naruto shivered and turned away, sad that he didn't get to see Ayame-chan. He would have looked for her, except he didn't want to have to deal with another angry villager. As he was walking out of the building, he heard a female voice shout something from the back room. He couldn't quite make out what she said though. He hoped that it was Mizan, and he turned back towards the counter. Behind the counter, the old man had turned to face the kitchen, from which a sleepy-looking Ayame was coming. Naruto's heart leaped, happy to see his Nasen once more. She was talking to the geezer, apparently not noticing Naruto. Naruto assumed that this must be someone related to her. Probably her grandfather, since the guy looked so old. Besides, they were both wearing white aprons, so they were at least both cooks or something. Ayame, turning away from the old guy, saw Naruto, and clapped her hands to her mouth. "Oh, Kami! I forgot all about it." She ran around the counter, sprinting towards Naruto. Once she got there, she scooped him up, hugging him tightly. He squirmed a little bit, because she hadn't given him time to move his arms, so his arms were being pressed against his sides. She didn't notice though. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Naruto, I forgot that I asked you to come." "Oh, Kami, I'm so sorry, I even made you a bowl of ramen, but then I got distracted, and then I had to do the dishes, and then the water spilled, and then my dad came," and then Naruto cut off her seemingly endless tirade, wheezing loudly. "Oh, Nasen, I can't breathe." Ayame turned beet red, and quickly let go. He dropped onto his knees on the ground, hugging his sides and gasping for air. As soon as he was able, he flashed her a thumbs up. "Thanks. I'm happy to see you too, Mizan." Ayame gave him a smile in return, happy to see her new brother again. She squatted down next to him, a slightly apologetic look in her eyes. "Sorry about that, Naruto. Want to try again?" Naruto nodded, and glomped her in a hug. She wrapped her arms about him, slightly in awe of the strength in his tiny arms. She knew a few kids near his age, and none of them were this strong. She patted his dirty blonde locks, thinking about how she would have to get him to take a bath soon. She sniffed, and wrinkled her nose. Okay, maybe very soon. There was only so much her sensitive nose could take. Suddenly, she noticed something strange piled by the doorway. It was some small dark clothing, all huddled together, as if they had just been dropped. Her gaze went back and forth between the boy in her arms and the clothes in the corner, a grin coming to her face. She pulled out of the lad's embrace, looking him in the eye. "Are those new clothes, Naruto?" He grinned, and nodded. But the grin shortly left his face, and he stared at the ground with a downcast look. "Yeah, but they're too big. So I'm stuck with these for a while." He grabbed his shirt and pants, looking at them in distaste. Ayame grinned at that. There was hope for the boy's fashion sense, after all. She grabbed his arms away from his ragged clothes and held his hands in her own, drawing his gaze up to meet hers. "Okay, then how about I fix them for you? I know enough sewing. I can hem the pants and shorten the sleeves on the shirt. Does that sound good?" Naruto looked at her in disbelief, before his face creased in a wide grin. He gave her a vigorous nod before wrenching his hands free of her and hugging her again. She tried to get him off her, but he was as firmly attached as a leech, and just as stubborn. She sighed, and decided to just relax and wait until he was done. Luckily, she didn't have to wait long before he let go, wiping some tears from his eyes. She frowned when she saw him do that, and reached into her apron pocket, fishing around for something. Finding it, she withdrew a small handkerchief, which she applied to Naruto's grubby and tear-streaked face. He tried to get away, but she was too quick. With the practiced ease of a born ramen chef, she outmaneuvered him at every point. Soon, Naruto was rubbing at his freshly rubbed face, glaring at her. She simply stuck her tongue out at him and stood up, brushing dust off her apron. I am care to explain to me just what's going on. She turned and let out a small squeak of dismay. Her father, old man Ichiraku himself, was standing behind her, arms folded and foot tapping in anger. His squinted eyes were glaring at her in anger, and he held a ladle in his right hand, as if in preparation for battle. She swallowed down her embarrassment and ran to her father, grabbing his arm. She pointed at Naruto, her eyes turned to her dad. Daddy, that's my new little brother. His name's Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto, this is my dad. Say hello? Naruto, overcoming his nervousness with a supreme effort, lifted a hand and waved a little at the old man. Ichiraku's eyebrows had shot up when Naruto's name was mentioned, and his eyes became more speculative and wary. He stepped forward and knelt to the dusty ground by Naruto, his gaze boring into the boy. Naruto was scared now, and afraid that the old man would try to beat him, but he stood his ground nevertheless. Something told him that the damn fox would never let him live it down if he ran from an old ramen man, even if he was a ramen chef. The old man simply sat there, looking at him, as if he could see through to Naruto's soul, and was judging him based on what he saw there. After a long moment, the old man gave a grunt and stood, walking back behind the counter. As he went into the kitchen, he turned his head and gave an approving nod to Ayam. She sighed in relief, glad to see that her father had approved of the lad. Naruto was also relieved, but because the creepy old guy had stopped staring at him, Ayam turned to Naruto and reached towards him with a pale hand, offering to help him up. He accepted, clasping her hand tightly with his. She hoisted him up, amazed by his lightness. He brushed dust off his clothes, and turned back to the entrance of the store. Naruto scooped up his new clothes and carefully cleaned them, not wanting to get his new clothes all messed up. He brought them to Ayam, who took them from him and examined them critically, comparing them to Naruto. This is too big, but I can hem that if I tuck that there. I hate to cut them. Oh, wow. Silk. Feels nice. Naruto watched her examine the clothing, coming to the silk shirt. This she was currently rubbing against her cheek, sighing as the material brushed against her skin. She turned an envious look towards Naruto. Lucky, I wish I had a silk shirt. She sighed semi-despondently, and turned back to the dark shirt she held in her hands, all business once more. At last, she turned back towards Naruto, grinning widely. Good news. I can make these fit you. It won't be great, but it'll have to do. How does that sound? Naruto grinned and nodded enthusiastically. Taking the clothes, she set them on the counter, intending to fix them up sometime during the next day. She heard her father call out, I am. I'm going home. Close up here, all right? She shouted back her acknowledgement, and the back door slammed shut. She sighed, wishing she knew what was bugging her father. He had had the strangest look on his face when he was examining Naruto. Making a mental note to bug her dad about it later, she turned back to Naruto, who was no longer there. She gasped in dismay, afraid that Naruto had run off on her, and ran to the entrance, brushing the flaps aside and searching the dark street. She couldn't see him, and she turned away from the entrance, feeling very depressed. She liked the kid, and she loved the look on his face when she was nice to him. Stepping to the counter, she began stroking the silk shirt, once again in awe of the material. But before long, she heard a strange noise coming from behind the counter. She stiffened immediately, afraid that someone might have broken in. She grabbed the ladle her father had left on the counter and edged slowly around the corner of the table, holding it tightly in her hands. She heard the sound coming from just in front of her, right behind this edge of the counter. She tensed and prepared to strike, bringing her ladle up behind her bed. Then, quickly stepping behind the counter, she struck, the ladle whistling through the air like some mighty battle axe. It came down with a thump on a blonde head, which promptly keeled over onto the floor. She stared dazed, denying the possibility of what had just happened. But it was true. She had just hit Naruto with her father's ladle. She stared down at the boy, seeing the empty ramen bowl on the floor next to his prone form. She relaxed, releasing the ladle from her vice-like hold on it. Well, that explained the strange sounds. Naruto had a way of simply sucking up the ramen, instead of eating it like normal people. She knelt down beside her little brother, looking at his head and hoping that she hadn't done any permanent damage. She gasped, bringing her head to her mouth in horror. There was a large gash on Naruto's head, and she saw blood staining his blonde locks a dull red. Tears filled her eyes, and she rushed to get a bandage, hoping that she hadn't killed the boy. She grabbed a strip of bandages from the kitchen, and then sprinted back to Naruto's side. She knelt down beside him, unrolling the bandages as she did so. But before she put the bandages on, she saw something strange. Before her eyes, the wound was closing, the flesh of his scalp knitting itself together to become whole once more. Soon, it was gone entirely, without so much as a scar left behind. She slumped back onto the floor, stunned at what she had just seen. Just then, Naruto came to, a little stunned and dazed. His eyes focused on Ayam, and for a moment they were slitted, and a deep crimson in color. But it lasted for only a moment, and when he blinked, They had returned to their normal shape and hue. Ayam was shocked, and tried to convince herself that her eyes were playing tricks on her. Naruto, now fully recovered, wondered why she was staring at him like that. "Oh, Ayam-san, what's up? You're looking at me weird," he trailed off as she didn't react, wondering why she was acting so weird. She leaned forward and grabbed his shoulders, pulling him closer. She stared deeply into his eyes, searching them. He tried to get away, but her grip was like iron. He decided to just let her get it over with, so she would stop acting weird. She sat there for nearly a full minute, just looking into his eyes, never blinking. Then she stood up, brushing dust off her clothes. Ignoring Naruto's questioning stare, she walked over to the counter, where some of the ramen ingredients were still sitting out. She began making another batch of the soup, her hands working mechanically with the skill of years of practice. Her mind was not on the job, but her body carried on regardless, confident in its ability. Naruto decided not to say anything, mainly because he didn't know what was going on. He got up off the floor, not bothering to get the dust off his clothes, and walked over to the other side of the counter. He selected a tall stool and sat in it, simply watching Ayam cook. She never even glanced at him, and just kept staring at nothing. He laid his head in his arms, with his neck at an angle so that he could continue watching her. After a short time, the ramen was complete, a basic batch of miso ramen, nothing fancy. She dumped the contents into 2 bowls, filling both to the brim. Silently, she picked up the bowls, balancing them in her hands, and walked around the counter. She set a bowl in front of Naruto, and then pulled up another stool so that she could sit next to him. She seated herself in the stool and set her bowl down in front of her, reaching into her apron pocket as she did so. After a moment's fumbling, she withdrew 2 pairs of chopsticks, still in their sealed package. She handed one to Naruto, who took it with muttered thanks, and opened the other herself. Taking the utensils out, she deftly snapped them apart, and clapped her hands together. "Itadakimasu." Then she turned her head to look at Naruto, her face creasing in a smile. Naruto met her gaze, curiosity shining in his eyes. She ignored his curious stare, her eyes pointed instead at the packaged chopsticks in the boy's hand. "Do you know how to open those?" Naruto, feeling sheepish, admitted that he didn't. Her smile grew, and she took the package from the boy, opened it, and showed him how to separate the chopsticks. Ayam handed them back with a flourish, and he grinned and took them. She held up a warning finger. "Now, Naruto-kun, it's polite to say thank you." He scratched the back of his head, the picture of sheepishness. "Oh, arigato gozaimasu. Is that it?" She giggled a little and patted his head lovingly. "Close enough. I know you're hungry, so chow down, huh?" Naruto nodded eagerly, and turned to his bowl with a ravenous expression. He was still curious about Ayam's weird attitude, but he was willing to let it go in exchange for ramen. He abandoned the usual method of picking up the noodles with his chopsticks, deciding to just pour the damn thing into his mouth. He was in the process of doing so, when Ayam asked him something he did not expect. "Ano Naruto-kun, why do people call you a demon?" Naruto spewed his ramen out of his mouth, reaching the far wall. He was too distracted to really notice, and was instead staring widely at his sister. She was pointedly not looking at him now, her face once more resuming the peculiar neutral expression from before. He looked down at his bowl, not really knowing what to say. Images of his beating yesterday flashed through his mind, accompanied by many others from his past. He didn't want Ayam to beat him too, and he was positive that she would hate him for telling her about the demon. But she had asked, and she was his sister. If he couldn't tell her this, then he couldn't tell anyone, well, except Itachi, who had found out on his own. Gathering his courage, he steeled himself and turned to Ayam, which prompted her to look at him in return. "It's well, do you remember when the Kyuubi attacked the village?" He expected an angry affirmative, but was surprised when she meekly shook her head. "I moved to this village about 2 years ago. I've heard a lot of stories from people who've eaten here though," and she hesitated, not wanting to meet Naruto's gaze. "Well, one time you walked by, and one of them pointed at you and said demon real loud. I didn't understand, but what do you have to do with the Kyuubi no Yoko?" Naruto sighed and looked down, not wanting to see her expression when he told her this. "Ano, you see, they called me that because I am the Kyuubi. Or actually, he's inside of me." He paused for a second, swallowing his fear once more. "I don't really understand it, but somehow the fox is inside me, ever since his attack 5 years ago." He kept his eyes firmly fixed on his ramen bowl, not daring to look up and see her look of hatred. Then, he heard a strange muffled sound. He peeked at her sideways, and was surprised to see her sniffing, trying to hold back tears. With an effort, she managed to hold them in. "Well?" she said in a teary, hoarse voice. "Tell me how it happened." Naruto, realizing that she didn't hate him yet, told her everything. He didn't even leave out his discussion with the Kyuubi, even though he knew she would be frightened. This was his one chance to come clean, and be totally honest with his sister. If it didn't happen now, then when it did happen it would be far more painful. Despite his young age, he knew that much about human nature. People tend to hold grudges, and that's when I left the district. Itachi-sensei is kind of a creepy guy, but he's okay when you get to know him. He looked up at her, and found her with her head buried in her hands, sobbing long and hard. He tentatively reached out to her, touching her shoulder lightly. Just as he touched her, she reached out and grabbed him, pulling him into a close embrace as she continued weeping in utter sorrow. He started to cry with her. He didn't know why, but the tears just kept coming. For a long time they cried together, her for his terrible life and horrible circumstances, and he for his sorrow for making his sister cry. After quite a bit of time had passed, they eventually pulled apart, their eyes bloodshot and voices hoarse. Ayam stood up, gathering up her untouched ramen and Naruto's half-finished ramen bowl. Neither of them was in much of a mood to eat anymore. With a motion of her head, she beckoned Naruto to follow her into the kitchen. Once they were there, she dumped out the cold remains of the ramen and began washing the bowls. He stood there, watching her wash the bowls, until they were both cleaned and dried. Then she grabbed a sponge and a towel, and he followed her back to the counter. She applied the towel to the wall which had suffered from Naruto's ramen projectile, washing its surface clean of the remnants. While she scrubbed with the sponge and dried with the towel, she began asking Naruto some questions. Naruto-kun, do you hate the villagers? For what they did to you? Naruto looked down at the floor, twiddling his fingers as he thought. He hadn't given it a lot of thought, and he honestly didn't know how he felt towards the village. Well, he knew he was afraid, but that was all. I don't really know, I am Izan. She threw him a questioning glance, before turning back to her cleaning. I don't think I do. But they haven't been very nice to me. He shut his eyes and let out a long sigh. No, I don't hate them. I don't like them very much, but I don't hate them. Ayam let out a sigh as well, reaching out to him and ruffling his blonde locks. So what will you do? You can't keep living in an alley all your life. It's good that what's his name? She scratched her head with a soapy finger, trying to remember the name of Naruto's new teacher. Naruto cocked his head sideways in confusion, and then figured out what she meant. Oh, you mean Itachi-sensei? She nodded, and then continued from where she left off. Yeah, him. Anyways, it's good that he's teaching you how to survive, but that doesn't help you with your career. Well, unless you want it to be a shinobi, but I don't think that the village will let you. He nodded glumly, well aware of what the village would think of him being a Konoha ninja. Well, maybe I should be a ninja anyways. She threw him a puzzled glance, wondering if he had even listened to her at all. But I just told you that the village would probably not let you. How can you be a ninja if they hate you? Naruto just winked at her, throwing in a foxy grin for good measure. Simple. I'll make them like me. They'll like me so much that they'll have to let me be a ninja. If I try hard enough, I can do anything. Right. He looked at her with wide, hopeful eyes. She grinned at him, doing an excellent imitation of his own patented grin. Definitely. They'll love you, and then you could be a ninja. Maybe you could even be the Hokage one day. Wouldn't that be cool? His eyes opened wide, and he jumped to his feet. Yeah! He shouted, clenching his tiny fists in determination, his eyes sparking with resolve. I will be the Hokage, and you better believe it! This drew a giggle from Ayam, which deflated the boy's bubble. Hey, why are you laughing? I'm serious here. She waved a hand at him disarmingly, stifling her laughter as well as she could. No, it's not that. She managed to choke out, voice shaking in suppressed laughter. It was when you said you better believe it. It was so cute. She couldn't hold it in anymore, and began rolling on the floor in laughter, crying from the sheer force of it. Naruto looked at her, wide-eyed, not sure what to feel about all this. Eventually she stopped laughing, getting up off the floor. She stood up straight and walked over to Naruto, squatting next to him. Without any warning, she reached out and grabbed his whiskered cheeks, pulling and tugging on them. He let out a squeak of protest, but was ignored. Hey, stop that! She giggled and continued tugging, not listening to his pleas for mercy. When she finally stopped, Naruto's cheeks were bright red, and he rubbed them gently with the palms of his hands. Ow, that hurt. Don't do that anymore. He turned on her, his eyes blazing in indignant anger. She held up her hands submissively, giving him her best puppy dog eyes. Sure enough, he melted before them like butter in a supernova, and he gave her a big hug, no longer caring about his still stinging cheeks. She hugged him back, throwing a little victory sign behind his back. Once more, I am, the greatest ramen chef in the 5 villages, reigns supreme. Hey, Naruto. Naruto lifted his head and stepped back, wondering what was up this time. Since Itachi is teaching you to survive, why don't you ask him to teach you how to be a ninja? From what I've heard, he's incredibly good. She leaned forward conspiratorially. In fact, I heard that he was nominated to join the ANBU. Naruto let out a small noise of admiration, thinking of the 12-year-old Chunin. He knew that Itachi had to be good, but not that good. Oh, Ine-san, do you really think I can be the Hokage one day? She turned around and knelt, reaching out with a finger. He watched the finger get closer and closer, before it came to a stop right in front of his head. He wondered what she was doing, but then the finger flashed forward and hit him square in the head, making his recoil in shock. She giggled and stood up, shaking her finger at him. We'll see. But you won't ever be Hokage if you can't dodge a finger. She turned and disappeared into the kitchen. He was going to follow her, but a shout from her dissuaded him. You need to go get some sleep. I have a feeling you're going to need all the energy you can get tomorrow. He grimaced as he thought of how animated Itachi had been when he was discussing new training ideas for Naruto. Somehow, he just knew that she was right. Yeah, okay. I'll see you tomorrow, okay, Nei-san? There was an acknowledging shout, which was drowned out by the sound of running water. He looked over at the clothes which were still sitting on the counter, and decided to leave them with I.M. After all, she had promised to fix them up for him so he could wear them. Turning, he walked to the entrance of the ramen shop, pushing the flaps aside. He stuck his head out onto the street, looking both ways before stepping out of the stand. For a moment, he just looked up at the moon, which was waxing to full. There was only a small sliver of black left on the moon, and he grinned as he thought of something. Tomorrow would be a full moon. Maybe it was an omen of some kind, a good one or a bad one, he couldn't say. But either way, things were going to get interesting. He grinned and turned left, running down the street. He knew a good cellar that was easy to sneak into, and the house there had been abandoned for several months now. It would be a good place to sleep tonight. He didn't normally sleep there because he was still afraid of the dark. But as soon as he thought that, his eyes started throbbing again. He stopped his run, slowing to a stop as he rubbed his eyes with his palms. It was the same feeling as before, and he figured that his vision must be going back to its monochromatic mode. Sure enough, he opened his eyes, and viewed the world in black and white. From within his mind, there was a demonic chuckle. Well, how do you like seeing the world through my eyes, Kit? A fascinating sensation, is it not? Naruto, starting to feel tired, just moaned sleepily in reply. This prompted a retort from the fox. What's this? I, the Kyuubi no Yoko, give you one of the greatest gifts that a mortal can receive, and you stand there and fall asleep? Brat, were you anyone else, I would rip you to bloody shreds for your insolence. Naruto, who was getting more and more tired by the second, began getting grumpy. Yeah, whatever. Just be quiet, damn fox. I didn't ask for your gifts, so shut up. He continued on in this strain for some time, saying whatever came to mind. As he talked, his stomach began hurting, and after a time it felt almost like it was burning. Finally he fell silent, grasping at his stomach as the pain overrode his fatigue, burning away any trace of sleepiness that remained. Silence. That one word seemed to rip through Naruto, setting his mind aflame, devouring his body, setting his blood boiling. He tried to scream, but his throat was being licked by tongues of fire. He tried to move, to find water, but his body was bound by flaming ropes that burned and scorched even as they bound him. This went on for a time, with his pain mounting and climbing, growing ever higher. Then, as suddenly as it came, it vanished. He fell onto his face on the ground, shaking in the after-effects of the pain. That was but a taste of my power, human. Never presume to speak to me in that fashion. I have tolerated it thus far, due to your age and inherent stupidity, but no longer. You said you wished to be a ninja, even daring to become the Hokage. Brat, I would set the world aflame, and die myself, rather than let a fool use my power. You will prove your worthiness, and you will begin now. Naruto, barely enduring the mental tirade, noticed something very odd indeed. Just a moment ago, he had been on fire, but his clothes were not even singed, nor was his flesh burned. Before he could ask the demon, he was answered, wondering how I did that. Simple. I am a demon, and I control your mind. I can make you see what I want you to see, do what I want you to do. Understand? Naruto swallowed in fear, realizing how bad it was to have a demon in charge. I will not wrest the reins of control from your mind unless absolutely necessary, but I can and will punish any signs of disobedience and insolence. Am I clear enough for your dull mortal mind, or must I repeat myself? Naruto gritted his teeth, hating to bow down to anyone. The demon read his mind, and decided to lay the boy's doubts to rest. I do not require you to bow to me, only to hear my words and acknowledge my power. Remember, I am not human, and thus I do not have your limitations. When I speak, I expect you to listen. Understood? Hi, I understand, Kyubidano. This brought a grunt of approval from the fox. Excellent. You are learning. Do not disappoint me, Uzumaki. And without another word, he was gone. Naruto waited for a moment, in case Kyuubi was still there, then rose to his feet, trembling all over his body. He felt very dizzy, and very weak. He could barely stand. With a struggle, he managed to stumble his way over to a nearby alley, where he leaned against a cold stone wall. With a sigh of relief, he slid slowly down the wall, hitting the ground with a small thump. He lay there, his eyes still monochromatic, examining the stone wall of the alley. He noticed the tiny differences in shade which told of different colors, and grinned feebly. His eyes slowly slid shut, and as he fell into the abyss of unconsciousness, one last thought crossed his mind. Wow, Kyuubi's pretty cool. He lay there, his breathing evening out and become the steady rhythm of sleep. But little did he know that he was being watched over. On the roof of one of the buildings the alley ran through, there was a black-haired teenager. He sat on the edge of the building, looking down at his blonde-haired student. A smile graced his lips for a moment, before it was chased away by his normal dire frown. He reached behind his back, making sure that his katana was still affixed to his back, and then settled down for the long wait until morning. The moon came out from behind a cloud, shining down on his back. Its rays illuminated a red and white fan, and threw his face into profile. Uchiha Itachi was on guard, and nothing would touch his protege. His eyes blazed with the arrogant fire of the Sharingan, and he became one with the night, a watchful weasel protecting the sleeping fox. Then the moon went behind the clouds once more, and he disappeared from sight. There was a strange snuffling noise, and the feeling of something moist being pressed against his ear. Naruto rolled over, only partially awake, trying to get back to sleep. The sensation retreated for a moment, and then returned, except this time it was on his cheek. He moaned and swept a hand feebly across his cheek, hitting something solid. He finally opened his eyes, and saw a small dog next to him. It was very young, and seemed no more than a puppy. Its white fur was soft and fluffy to the touch. It was nuzzling his cheek with its nose, examining the whisker marks that graced Naruto's cheeks. He lightly pushed the dog away so that he could sit up, rubbing the newfound wet spot on his cheek. He reached out with his free hand, laying it on the dog's head. It whined at him, and nuzzled against his hand. With a smile, he began scratching behind its ears, which it enjoyed immensely. With another pleading whine, it rolled over onto its belly and stuck its paws in the air. Naruto, grin growing ever wider, began scratching the puppy's belly. Just then, a voice from behind Naruto startled him. "Hey, have you seen my hey, that's Akamaru." He was about to turn to see who was addressing him, when the person in question ran past him, going down in their hands and knees next to the dog. It was a small boy, no older than Naruto, with dirty brown hair. He was dressed in a pair of long khaki shorts, and wore a small brown coat. He was bending over the dog, picking it up carefully. He stood up once more, the dog cradled in his arms, and Naruto stood with him, glancing curiously at the boy's face. And he had good reason to be curious, for the boy had small red tattoos that ran down his cheeks, looking almost like a pair of red fangs. His eyes were dark, but they were slitted, which gave him a bestial look. He flashed a grin at Naruto, which displayed his pointed teeth. "Thanks for finding him." He ran off, and I couldn't find him. The puppy woofed at Naruto, and the boy shushed it. "Quiet, Akamaru. You're gonna get us in trouble." Akamaru whined a little, but fell silent. Naruto was wondering what exactly was going on, and he said as much. The boy laughed loudly, and his grin grew a little bigger. "Oh, me and Akamaru here were just having some fun." He leaned towards Naruto, whispering conspiratorially. "We're not supposed to be out here, but we got bored. So, we snuck out." He snickered as he said that, and stepped closer to Naruto. He shifted the puppy so it lay across his left arm, and he stuck his right arm out towards Naruto. "I'm Inuzuka Kiba." Naruto stared at the hand for a moment, puzzled. Then, he remembered that he had seen villagers do this sometimes, as some kind of greeting. He reached out and grabbed Kiba's hand with his own. "Ano I'm Uzumaki Naruto." As Kiba shook his hand enthusiastically, he remembered something that Ayam had told him a couple of days ago. "Hajimashite." He bowed low as he did so. Kiba let out a loud guffaw and slapped Naruto hard on the back, causing the boy to stumble a little. "Ah, come on. No need to be all formal, right? Anyways, you wanna come play with us? We know a great place to have mud fights." He looked at Naruto hopefully. Naruto's head rose, and he gazed at the boy in something just short of awe. This boy, this stranger, came out of nowhere and wanted to be Naruto's friend. He swallowed nervously, not sure what to say. He'd never talked to another boy his age before, at least not one who wanted to talk to him. He opened his mouth to say something when he was interrupted by a loud yell from behind him. He turned to see who it was, and saw a young girl, no more than 11 or 12. She was obviously related to Kiba, because she also had red tattooing and slitted pupils. She was snarling in anger, her fangs showing in a display of rage. "Kiba! Get your ass back here now!" She stood there at the end of the alley, hands on her hips, panting from exertion. He gave her a shit-eating grin, and stuck his tongue out at her. "Ha! You wish, sis? You couldn't catch me in a gazillion years, you old hag." This prompted a long and low growl from the girl. "What the hell did you just say, brat?" Kiba's grin grew, and he gave her the finger. "Catch me if you can, bitch." With that, and a wave to Naruto, he ran down the alley, Akamaru barking all the way. The girl stood there, stunned for a moment, then gave chase, a red glow in her eyes and a murderous intent in her soul. Naruto watched them go, then shivered as he thought of them. They were definitely the weirdest pair he had ever seen. Still, Kiba had been nice to him. HR let a small smile dance on his lips. Maybe there was hope for him yet. If he could get the children to like him, then surely everyone else would, right? He sighed and shoved his hands in his pockets, storing the thought away for later perusal. Turning himself about, he walked slowly down the alley, thinking about what he had to do today. Well, Itachi-sensei had told him that he would have to meet him for training, but he didn't say when or where. Naruto groaned in exasperation. He should have asked Itachi, instead of just running off. Well, at least he could go to the places where Itachi was likely to be. Stopping for a moment, he pondered this new dilemma deeply. The Uchiha district was out of the question. If he was found there, he was royally screwed. Maybe a training area? No, he didn't know where Itachi trained. All he knew was that Itachi was a Chunin, was an Uchiha, and was being nominated for ANBU. Suddenly, he brightened. Maybe Itachi would know where he was. Naruto looked up at the sky, checking the sun's position. Almost directly overhead. He gasped in horror. It was already noon. He had slept a full 12 hours. He hurtled down the road to the ramen stand, determined to meet Itachi as quickly as he could. He ran as quickly as he could, dodging between people, cutting through alleys, and pushing his way through crowds. Luckily, he was still a kid, and no one cared if they saw a kid running down the street. If he had been older, perhaps the people might have noticed his bright blonde hair and whisker marks. If they had noticed, he would have been in serious trouble. But luckily enough, the daily crowds managed to hide his presence for the most part, and the worst he got were 1 or 2 angry looks. Finally, he skidded to a halt outside of the ramen stand, panting from the exertion of his run. He was about to step inside when he heard the sound of voices from within. He cautiously moved the flaps aside, peeking into the stand's interior. He saw a couple of ninjas inside, chatting with the old man, but they were at least Chunin level. He could tell from the jackets. That was bad news, since anyone who was at Chunin would definitely know about the Kyuubi. He didn't need another beating, especially since he was supposed to be training with Itachi-sensei. His eyes scanned the rest of the room, looking for his sister. He didn't see her, but he heard the sound of water running from the kitchen. His eyes opened wide in inspiration. There was a back door to the kitchen, and it was almost certainly her back there, washing the dishes or something. Without any hesitation, he quickly slipped around the shop to the back, scanning it for an entrance. Finding one, he tried to open it, but found it locked. After a moment's thought, he raised a clenched fist to knock loudly on the door. But, as his hand descended to hit the door, it abruptly opened. He was too shocked to check his swing, and went stumbling forward, falling through the door. He hit something on the way down, and carried to the floor with him, landing on it with a loud whump. He sighed in relief, thankful that he had hit something soft on his way down. Just before he got up, though, the thing that broke his floor began moving, much to his surprise. Naruto opened his eyes, and looked at what he had landed on. It was some sort of white cloth, or an apron of some sort, but there was still someone inside. Someone wearing a white apron. A feeling of dread flooded through him as he slowly lifted himself up, craning his neck upwards. His horrified gaze fell upon a bead-red Ayam, with her fists clenching in anger. She grabbed him by his small shoulders and pushed him up and off her, trying to stop him from crushing her lungs. He went back on his ass, yelping a little in pain. He looked at Ayam again, his own cheeks turning red in embarrassment. She simply threw him a glare and stood up, brushing dust and dirt off her white apron and clothing. Reaching down once more, she picked up her white hat, which had fallen from her head when Naruto had toppled her. She dusted it carefully, mewing softly in sorrow as she observed its poor condition. Turning around, she set it carefully down on the counter. As she stood there, her shoulders began shaking uncontrollably. Naruto, he gulped loudly, fearing her rage. You have exactly 10 seconds to explain to me why the hell you tackled me. His mouth opened, and he tried desperately to think of words. He just couldn't think of what to say. 5 seconds. He began sweating, trying not to think of what she would do to him. Suddenly, inspiration struck. He grinned devilishly as he prepared his absolute defense against Ayam. With almost no time left, he was ready for her. Time's up, Naruto. She turned and brought her right arm back, preparing to sucker punch the kid. You're gonna regret, she broke as she saw his face. Her arm quivered and began dropping. Her eyes were wide open in shock. She hadn't expected Naruto to sink this low. This was undefeatable. Naruto stood there, head cocked slightly to the side, giving her the best puppy dog eyes he had ever done. He chuckled silently, knowing that she was defenseless against this move. Many women had fallen before this technique, even a couple of those who had hated him. Not many, but a few nonetheless. He watched her screw up her eyes in an effort to break his spell, but it was utterly futile. She couldn't resist any longer. Time to seal the deal, he thought to himself. I am Mizan, don't be mad at me. I'm so sorry. Her defenses broke down at this final blow, and her eyes sparkled at his cuteness. Naruto almost cackled in glee as he saw her face lose any trace of anger, knowing that the cutesy talk had finished her off. She proved him right as she dove at him, glomming him to her in a wild hug. Kawaii! She screamed, nuzzling his cheek with her own. He let out a foxy grin, and hugged her back, satisfied in his victory. She held him in a tight embrace for nearly a minute, and then released him, her eyes still shining from the aftereffects of his charm. Kami, Naruto, that was so cute! How the hell did you do that? He laughed as he saw her amazed stare. Just by being me, I am Mizan. She simply stared at him a moment longer, mouth open. Then she gave him a wide grin, and began giggling, ruffling his hair with a free hand. You were just like a little blonde teddy bear. So cute. His smile died. Her comment had reminded him of his teddy bear, from a year ago. It had met a terrible fate at the hands of the villagers, and he had taken it badly. His newly glum attitude showed on his face, and she gave him a concerned look. "Naruto-kun? Are you okay?" He nodded glumly, and then gave a weak smile. He was determined to not let it bug him, not after all this time, and especially not when he was with I Am Neeson. "Yeah, I'm great. After all, I'm gonna be the Hokage one day, right?" He thumped his chest with a hand, striking a heroic pose. "I'm gonna be the strongest ever." "Believe it!" She giggled, patting his head. "I'm sure you will. But you'll never be the Hokage if you don't train with Itachi. I thought you said you were going to meet him today." Naruto nodded, becoming serious once more. He had almost forgotten why he was here. "Yeah, I was gonna meet him, but I don't know where he is. I mean, I can't go to the Uchiha district, they'd slaughter me." I Am nodded, frowning a little at his choice of words. "Well, have you looked for him?" Naruto, looking sheepish, shook his head slowly. I Am sighed and flicked his forehead with a finger. "Figures. Well, I would help you, but we're about to hit the lunch rush." Rubbing his forehead where she flicked him, he began to give her his puppy dog eyes once more. She covered his eyes with her hand, sighing in relief. "Seriously, Naruto, I can't help you. Maybe if you look for him, you'll find him, right behind you." She gasped, and looked at the entryway to the kitchen. There stood Uchiha Itachi, his dark eyes as cold and calculating as ever. Naruto threw her hand off his face and turned to stare at his teacher, a sheepish grin once more gracing his features. Hey there, Itachi-sensei. I was just looking for ya." He was cut off by a slashing motion from Itachi, and instinctively shut his mouth. He hadn't stayed alive this long by pissing off powerful ninjas. He thought, then revised that. He didn't piss them off on purpose. "I know what you were doing, Naruto. I am a shinobi, information is my job." I Am's mouth dropped slightly, awed by his presence. He was the same age as her, but he seemed so strong and wise that sometimes she felt he was a century ahead of her. She had always had a crush on the teenager, and a blush graced her pale cheeks as she subtly looked him over. Itachi noticed her silent perusal, and flashed her a smirk. "Mind if I take the boy off your hands, miss?" Gathering her wits, she slowly shook her head, pushing the boy towards Itachi. Naruto stumbled forward before regaining his balance and turning around, waving her a silent goodbye. She nodded, and then made a shooing motion at him. He got the hint and turned toward Itachi, flashing him a salute. Itachi simply raised an eyebrow at the lad and turned away, walking out of the door. Suddenly, I Am felt the urge to say something to this stoic, dark-haired boy. "Ano Itachi-san." He turned back around, fixing her with a calculating stare. His smirk returned, and he nodded at her. "Can I help you, I Am-san?" For a moment, she was stunned at the fact that he knew her name, and then remembered his comment earlier about how information was his job. She gave him a smirk in return, making him raise an eyebrow in mild surprise. "Yeah, you can. You can take me out on a date." She folded her arms, surprised she was doing this. But she had wanted to go out with him for a long time, she just could never work up the nerve. After all, she barely knew the guy's name. He looked her up and down, doing a quick appraisal of her. He was surprised that she had asked that, considering that he practically oozed with an aura of go away. He was quite shocked that a civilian had the courage to ask him that. He knew many kunoichi that had the same feelings she did, but none of them had ever worked up the nerve to say anything. But here was this girl, a ramen chef, who had more backbone than trained ninjas. The mere thought of it made him chuckle, and he looked at the girl in a different light. Well, why not give it a try? But first, he had to test her no. "You're not worth my time." With that, he turned away from her and began walking away. She stared after him, utterly shocked. For a moment, he had looked like he was going to accept, but then he said something like that. She stared helplessly out after him for a moment, and then clenched her fists in anger. Who the hell did he think he was to dismiss her like that? By Kami, she was gonna shove his words down his damn throat. She stormed past Naruto and through the doorway, rounding the corner and coming to bear on Itachi. "Hey! Uchiha bastard!" He turned around, and saw her coming towards him, eyes flaring and teeth grinding in rage. Before he could reply, she was upon him. "Don't you ever say shit like that again, or I will personally." At the last moment, she remembered Naruto behind her, watching her with wide eyes. She couldn't be graphic in front of him. Nuts. Do something you won't like. At all. Itachi looked at her in surprise. This girl had surpassed his expectations, even if her threat had been a little vague. He thought about that threat again, and then changed his mind. Actually, a vague threat could be more threatening than an explicit one, since the punishment was left up to the threatened one's imagination. He made a mental note to remember that, and then turned his full attention to the girl. Well, she was doing amazingly well so far. One final test. Try me. With those words, he shunted chakra to his eyes, his Sharingan blazing to life in response. He fixed his crimson orbs on her, the black pupils of his eyes swirling slowly, catching her eye and holding it. She stared deeply into his eyes, and a cloud sensation crept over her. She broke into a cold sweat, feeling the strange presence around her and in her. She was captivated by those eyes, lost in its scarlet depths. She was drawn deeper and deeper. Falling into them, she shook her head, trying to regain her senses. No way in hell was she backing down now, not when she had come this far. Looking straight into his eyes, she stepped forward one step. She was right in front of him now, so close that her nose was almost touching his. Slowly, her gaze never leaving his eyes, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a light kiss, with her lips barely brushing his, but it shook him to his very foundations. He stared at her, all attempts at masking his emotions gone. She leaned away from him, giving him an excellent copy of the smirk he had used on her. "Did that change your mind?" she said softly. His Sharingan faded from his eyes, leaving his dark black orbs staring into her own. After a long moment, he smiled. Not smirked, but smiled, just like the 12-year-old he was. She grinned right back at him, her eyes lighting up in hope. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and kissed her softly. Leaning away, he flashed a copy of Naruto's foxy grin. "Definitely. This evening?" She giggled and nodded. 7:30. "If you're late, you can kiss those eyes of yours goodbye." He backed away, thinking for a moment that she actually meant it. She giggled at his reaction, which reassured him somewhat. He nodded at her, then donned his emotional mask once more. His cold and calculating stare once more in place, he beckoned to Naruto to follow him. With one last glance at Ayam, he turned and walked away, Naruto struggling to keep pace. She watched them disappear around the corner, and sighed softly. Well, that went well. She giggled as she thought of what they could do later on tonight. Since the brash and daring approach worked so well this time, she snickered evilly, then turned and went back into her store. After all, ramen was her job, and the whole thing with Ayam and Itachi was spur-of-the-moment stuff. It won't have anything to do with the plot. I think. I couldn't resist, though. It was just so much fun to write. Okay, plot development time. Itachi walked quickly down the streets of Konoha, making his way towards the city wall. Naruto was behind him, doing his best to keep up with the long, steady strides of his sensei. Itachi wove through the throngs of people effortlessly, his lithe body taking advantage of the smallest gaps, whereas Naruto's short form was often hard-pressed to find an opening through the crowds of people. More than once, he had been forced to resort to crawling in between people's legs. This was, of course, done deliberately by Itachi. He was testing the boy's tenacity and endurance, as well as seeing how quickly he could adapt to unexpected changes. So far, the lad was doing well, but not quite good enough. Itachi had to stop on 2 different occasions so that the lad could catch up. Still, he mused thoughtfully, it was impressive. The lad showed natural agility, as well as great potential strength and simply amazing endurance. And his determination was also staggering. Itachi-sensei, why do you have to go so fast? Naruto complained loudly, sweat running down his face in salty streams. Itachi didn't even bother to respond, and simply increased his pace. Naruto whined, and jogged steadily behind Itachi. Before long, they were at the village wall, and Itachi turned and walked along it for a ways, walking slower to give Naruto some slack. After all, he wasn't completely heartless. After he walked a ways, he stopped by a section of the wall, leaning against it. Naruto slowed to a halt, wheezing a little as he tried to catch his breath. This made Itachi smirk. The kid was only 5, yet he had just run across half of Konoha. Not bad for such a young kid. Turning slightly so that his right shoulder was against the wall, he glanced about surreptitiously, scanning the area for any onlookers. He saw none, so he beckoned Naruto over quietly. "What's up, Itachi-sensei?" Naruto's voice was still a little wheezy, but he seemed mostly recovered from his run. Itachi lifted a finger to his mouth in a request for silence, and then motioned to Naruto again. He padded over to his teacher, wondering what the mysterious Uchiha was doing this time. Once he was next to Itachi, Itachi scanned the area yet again. No visible watchers and no noticeable chakra sources. Before anyone came, he slammed his right hand against a piece of the wall and shoved chakra into it. The wall seemed to shimmer, then phased out of existence, revealing a large rectangular hole to the outside world. Naruto gaped at the new opening, and then glanced at his teacher in shock. Itachi barely seemed to notice, as he was slipping quickly through the opening. Naruto scrambled after him, and as soon as he made it through, the section of the wall returned. Itachi sighed softly, turning to Naruto, who was bursting with curiosity. "Oh, Itachi-sensei, what was that?" Itachi sighed, making a gesture at Naruto to lower his voice. He tried his question again, this time in a barely audible whisper. Itachi leaned close to Naruto and laid a hand on the wall. "This is an old escape route. It's foolish to have only one way in and out of a village, so there are several of these constructed. With the proper application of chakra from either side, they become air for a limited time, depending on the amount of chakra." His gaze caught and held Naruto's eyes staring at him. "If you had not followed as quickly as you did, you would have been trapped within the village, and your chance to learn would have been irreversibly revoked." Naruto gulped audibly, and shivered a little in fright. He had come that close to losing his chance to train. "So, where are we gonna go now?" Itachi made a chopping motion, commanding silence from Naruto. After the kid climbed up, Itachi moved off into the forest, motioning Naruto to follow him. After trekking through the trees for some time, they came to a clearing. There was a small river running through the middle of it, and there were large boulders scattered here and there. The trees surrounding the clearing had many gashes, and there were even a few trees that had fallen, roots and all. Itachi turned to Naruto, making a wide sweeping motion that encompassed the field. This is my personal training spot. We will meet here on the appointed training days, and only here. If you do not arrive when and where I tell you to, that will be the end of our training. You will obey my every order without question, and you will perform every task set to you without complaint. Is that understood? If these terms are disagreeable to you, leave now. Naruto nodded, without hesitation. That wasn't enough for Itachi though, who simply stood there, staring at him with icy eyes. Hi, sensei. Naruto made a small bow to Itachi. Itachi gave him an accepting nod, and then reached into his belt pouch. Then here. Take these. He tossed several bags onto the ground in front of Naruto. He bent down to pick them up, taking a moment to examine their contents. Inside the first bag was 5 wooden kunai, excellently carved. They seemed to be weighted to make them twice as heavy as regular kunai. The edges of the blade were the only thing that was not wooden, but razor-sharp metal painted the same dull brown as the rest. When passing through cursory inspection, it would seem like merely a weighted practice kunai. But Naruto was sure that underneath the wooden skin lay a real, sharp, and deadly kunai. He glanced at Itachi, who merely motioned to the second bag. The second bag, when opened, contained a stack of 20 or so shuriken, standard make. They, too, were encased in wood to seem like merely practice shuriken, but the gleam of the edges proved otherwise. He took one and tossed it in the air. Even in his inexperienced hand, it seemed to fly true. He knew that these had to be weapons of the finest make, and again glanced at Itachi. Itachi seemed mildly perturbed with Naruto by this time, and pointed insistently at the third and final bag. Slowly, he opened the bag, wondering what could be inside. Within it lay a small scroll. He reached and pulled it out, wondering what was written within. He walked over to Itachi and held it out to him. Ano, Itachi-sensei. What? Itachi seemed impatient about something. Ano, I can't read. Itachi never lost his mask of apathy, but a flicker of surprise shot through his eyes. Naruto shook his head sadly, knowing that hardly anyone in the village would tolerate him, much less teach the demon brat to read. Itachi frowned at that, thinking harder. Suddenly, he snapped his fingers. What about that girl? Ayayaki? Ayado? I am. Naruto put in, slightly perturbed that his sensei couldn't even remember her name. Yes, her. You should ask her if she would teach you. All you need is a basic understanding of kanji. Your vocabulary could use work, but it's not as important. Naruto was silent for a moment, considering his sensei's words. Maybe Nei-san would help him. He'd have to ask her. Very well, I'll talk to her. I'll be seeing her later tonight anyways. For a moment, a very slight red tinge permeated his cheeks, but was gone in a moment. He coughed slightly and turned to Naruto, all business once more. Well, that scroll contained the 3 basic jutsu needed to graduate from the Ninja Academy. They would have made an excellent introduction to the techniques I plan to teach you. For now, you'll simply have to learn from my example. Naruto nodded slowly, silently thanking Kami that Itachi was still willing to help him. Sensei? What's chakra? Itachi sighed for a moment, and then motioned to the boy to take a seat. Itachi leaned against a nearby tree, and then settled into lecture mode. Listen, and listen well. I shall only explain this once. Afterwards you will be allowed 3 questions, and only 3. Now, chakra is the energy used by ninjas. It can be made to do any number of things, from blasting your enemies with a fireball, to forming a wall of earth. He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts, and then continued. Chakra is formed by mixing the 2 energies in your body, the physical energy inherent in your cells, and the mental or spiritual energy gained from training and experience. The more you train and use your chakra, the greater your chakra capacity will be. Ninjas combine these 2 energies, and it becomes what we call chakra. To perform jutsu, we mold the chakra into the appropriate shape and amount we need. We do this by using hand seals. He raised his hands and slid them together, thrusting his index and middle finger out to make the tiger seal. This is one of the 12 general seals used to mold our chakra. Almost every jutsu will require these seals. The more acquainted you are with the jutsu, the fewer seals will be required to use it. He sighed, thinking hard. Think of it like this. Say I told you to twiddle your thumbs, like so. He put his hands together and stuck his thumbs in the air. Then he moved his thumbs in an orbit about each other, a constant circular motion. At first, it requires conscious thought, and you have to maintain your concentration. But if you've been doing it for 5 hours, you wouldn't have to think about much, would you? Naruto shook his head, understanding what his sensei was saying. Exactly. The more you do it, the easier it is to do. Alright, that's a basic explanation of chakra and how ninjas use it. Some ninjas do it differently, and others don't or can't use chakra at all. But you'll learn all about those eventually, whether you want to or not. Because, in the shinobi world, information can save you or destroy you. The more knowledge you have, the better chance of staying alive you possess. But if you have no knowledge, then you will almost certainly die. He glared hard at Naruto, trying to drill this point home. Remember that. Any questions? Yeah. What are the 12 general hand seals you mentioned? Itachi raised his eyebrow in surprise. Very good. An excellent question. Here, I'll show them to you. He went through the list of seals slowly, telling Naruto the seal's name and function as he did them. After this was done, he waited a moment so that Naruto could commit them to memory. Now your second question? Naruto thought hard, then brightened. Okay, you said those were the 12 general seals, right? Itachi nodded. Okay, so that means there are specific seals, right? Itachi nodded again, surprised at his student's mental acuity. So, you can make a specific seal that will do what you want it to do? Like, if I wanted a jutsu to make ramen appear, I just figure out how to mold the chakra, and then create a seal that does it all for me? Itachi repressed a grin. An interesting choice of jutsu. Not exactly. There are many jutsu which require very carefully molded chakra of certain amounts. A self-made seal could backfire, or put too much or not enough chakra into your jutsu. It would take quite some time just to make one specific seal for a jutsu. However, there are some jutsu that require a certain hand seal, either because they require little chakra control or because it requires exact chakra control. For anything except those two extremes, simply use the general hand seals. Naruto committed that to memory, glad to see that at least someone was willing to explain things. This brought forth a low growl from the Kyuubi, who rather enjoyed his laziness. Then, for the last question, do you have to use chakra for just regular fighting? Itachi shook his head slowly. No, you don't. In most cases, taijutsu simply requires stamina, strength, and speed. There are some moves that do require chakra, but not many. Now, there is something else that you need to know. Ninjas can concentrate their chakra within their own bodies, which augments their strength and speed. For example, an average ninja can jump maybe 5 feet maximum. However, by using chakra to add to their leg strength temporarily, they could jump 3 times that amount, easily. Some people who have trouble using chakra outside of their body can still use it within their body, which can make them formidable taijutsu specialists. It's one of the easier things to learn, and I'll teach it to you soon. But first, I'll be teaching you how to mold your chakra. They both stood up, and Itachi led Naruto to the edge of the river that ran through the clearing. There, standing on the edge of it, they spent an hour or so teaching Naruto how to mold chakra successfully. After that, he set Naruto running laps, trying to shunt chakra into his legs as he ran to increase his speed. Naruto had some trouble with multitasking like that, but Itachi insisted that he learn it. After 2 hours of that had passed, they took a small break, and then Itachi taught Naruto the proper way to throw kunai and shuriken. The rest of the afternoon died away as the blonde boy threw his kunai at trees, getting used to it. He would need a lot of practice, but he seemed to have gotten the hang of it. As the sun started to go out of sight beyond the horizon, Itachi motioned to Naruto to follow him. Groaning from his many aches and pains from the day's training, he went after his sensei. They walked slowly back into the village, using the same way in as they had before. After the wall reformed behind Naruto, he turned to Itachi. Oi sensei, if all you have to do is push some chakra into the wall, then why can't enemies get in through there? Itachi looked at his pupil carefully. He had become used to Naruto's unusual insight and perception, but it still surprised him a little each time. Well, several factors are involved. One of them is that it requires a very specific formation of chakra, which is only taught to ANBU members and officers of the Konoha police force. If any other sort of chakra is applied to it, it sets off an alarm at ANBU headquarters. It makes it rather safer than it would be otherwise, but there is still a danger, I'll admit. For example, if an ANBU member or someone from the police goes nukenin, then they could sneak in a small force through those entry points. He grunted a little, deciding not to follow that line of thinking. Despite that, though, he made a mental note to have a chat with his father about those entryways. They needed better protection. They continued walking down the roads of the village, until they reached the ramen stand. The last of the dinner rush was leaving, and the stand was preparing to close down. Itachi sent Naruto running off somewhere, and turned towards the small food stand. He went to the door in the back of the stand and waited, leaning against the wall. After a few moments, Ayam came out of the back door, closing it softly behind her and walking off. Without a word, Itachi fell in behind her, using his stealth to its limit to ensure that she didn't hear him. She walked to the front of the ramen stand and stood there, glancing left and right. After a moment, she sighed and turned around. As she did so, she ran into Itachi, who was simply standing there. With a stifled gasp, she jumped away from him, her hand creeping behind her as she glared at him. He lifted up his head, and she relaxed, pulling her hand back from behind her back. Cammy, don't scare me like that. He repressed a chuckle, settling for an arrogant smirk. I can't help it, it's my nature. He pointed to the Hittite on his forehead. Ninja, remember? She grumbled at him. Yeah, whatever. Ninja or no ninja, don't sneak up on me. Got it? He shrugged slightly, a little troubled by her offensive attitude. What was with her? Yeah, she was like that before, but that was because he goaded her. Without thinking, he stepped forward. She tilted her head away from him, looking at the ground. I am. She glanced at him out of the corner of her eyes. What's wrong? She sighed a little, and turned away from him. I thought you wouldn't come. I thought you were just making fun of me before. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a long sigh. I thought you were being a typical Uchiha brat, spoiled and uncaring. Itachi stared at her back, surprised. Was that how people thought of the Uchiha clan? He stepped closer to her, standing right behind her. Look at me. Turned around slowly, but she couldn't bring herself to meet his eyes. Chan. Her head started, surprised to hear the suffix. When she did, she looked into his eyes. He dropped his mask once more, allowing his true emotions to come forth. I'm Itachi. I'm not an Uchiha. I'm simply a black sheep, or a black weasel if you prefer. She giggled a little at that, and he smiled. I don't know what you think about the Uchiha clan, and I don't know what others think, but I would like to know what you think of Itachi. He stood there, silent, waiting for her answer. After a long pause, she gave it. I think that Itachi is arrogant, selfish, and cruel. His shoulders slumped, and his head drooped in defeat. He groaned inwardly, upset that his chance with the girl was blown. The first time he found someone who wasn't a total airhead, or a complete bitch, and she had shot him down. He turned to leave. I wasn't finished. He paused for a second, not daring himself to hope. I also think that Itachi can be kind, and gentle, and generous. I think that Itachi could be a great man. And I think that I like Itachi. He felt her arms wrap around his torso, squeezing him tight. That's what I think about Itachi. Now, what do you think about I am? He chuckled, turning in her embrace and looking at her. They were very close, and he stared deeply into her eyes. I think that I am is sweet, kind, and gentle. I think that I am can make damn fine ramen. That brought a grin to her face, but she seemed to be looking for something else. I also think that I am can be a pain in the ass, and totally annoying when she wants to be. Her grin became even bigger, and she gave him a playful punch in the ribs. He groaned melodramatically, rubbing his ribs gingerly. Then he brought his hands up and laid them on her cheeks, looking straight into her eyes. I think that I like I am. He brought her face closer to his, and her eyes shut in preparation for the kiss that was sure to come. But nothing happened. She opened her eyes and discovered that she was hugging a giant weasel plushie, who was flashing a victory sign and giving her a shit-eating grin. From the roof of the ramen stand there came a call. I also think that I am Chan insulted Itachi's feeling, which means Itachi goes home. See you later. In a swirl of leaves, he was gone. You bastard! Come back here! We have a date! She shouted after him, but it was too late. He was gone. She cursed silently under her breath, using words colorful enough to make a jounin blush. However, things went downhill from there. Her father emerged from the ramen stall, holding a ladle in his hand. What's all this about a date? Where's the little bastard? I'll kill him for touching my daughter. There was a manic gleam in his eyes, and he waved his ladle about, yelling about all the cruel and highly unusual things he would do when he got a hand on the, in his words, brat who soiled his daughter's good name. I am rushed to her father's side, trying to calm him down, but he was in a killing frenzy. From a roof across the street, Itachi was watching this with an amused smirk. That is, until he heard some of the things that the old man was threatening to do. His smirk died a terrible death as he overheard the man's plan for his lungs. When the old gentleman began musing on what could be done with Itachi's kidneys, he knew it was time he got out of there. After all, even a genius ninja like Itachi needs kidneys, and ugh. This hurts my soul, but I have to do a time skip. If I described everything that happened in these next few months, this story would be of legendary proportions. As it is, it's already excessively long. Please don't hurt me. Time passed quickly for Naruto. Before he even realized it, a week had passed. Then 2. By the time a month had gone by, he had learned the 12 general seals as well as Kawarimi no Jutsu. Itachi was pleasantly surprised by his potential. He wasn't the brightest student, but he was tenacious, almost to a fault. If he couldn't do something, he simply got up and tried again. He considered it most remarkable for a boy Naruto's age, especially since he did it all without anger or complaints. Itachi found himself rather enjoying his time spent with the lad. Sadly, more often than not, he was out on missions, and Naruto was often left to train by himself. Ayam had also been teaching him basic language skills, and he could read rather well. He was having immense difficulty in writing, because he could never quite figure out how to make the brush move properly along the paper. Itachi had drew Ayam aside one day and asked her to focus on that aspect, since Shinobi needed to be able to write in order to create seals and explosive tags. She told him she would do it, but only in return for another date, which she got. As another month, Naruto grew increasingly closer to his teacher and his sister, seeing Itachi as almost an older brother. One day, he had referred to Itachi as his Nai-san. Itachi had given him a shocked look then left. Ever since then, Naruto had noticed that his teacher's attitude about familial matters had taken a turn for the worse, but Itachi refused to explain his sudden dislike for his family. He began training Naruto harder than ever, spending a full month on basic taijutsu and chakra control techniques. Towards the end of that second month, Naruto had been able to successfully transform into his sensei, and was rewarded with rare praise from Itachi. Whenever Naruto failed, or was saddened, Ayame was there to comfort him. She had begun going out on dates with his raven-haired sensei more often, and they seemed happy together. The only time Itachi would ever drop his carefully constructed emotional mask was when he was with her. Every time he saw her, it was as if the sun had come out from behind the clouds. Not even Naruto could get the same reaction from him. Itachi even taught her some self-defense techniques, as later in life she would probably need them. Naruto was happy for both of his sakes, even if he considered it mushy. He wasn't sure whether he liked Itachi better while he was in teacher mode or in Ayame mode. Ayame's father, old man Ichiraku, had been very cautious around Naruto for a while, but had softened considerably over the course of the first few weeks. Now, he looked on Naruto as a sort of grandson, and always gave him free ramen when he came by, which was often. Naruto had become infatuated with the soup, and he had even come up with several songs about it. Itachi had noticed this, and put a stop to it gently but firmly. He had told Naruto that obsessions were unhealthy for a ninja to have, as it showed a potential weakness to your enemies. He painted a scenario for Naruto. One man was holding a bowl of ramen hostage, and the other a small child. Which hostage would Naruto rescue first? He still couldn't answer that one to this day, and Itachi had been smug for days afterwards. During the course of a third month, Naruto had come along amazingly. Due to his abnormally high chakra and stamina, he was learning at a greatly accelerated. If he didn't understand something right off the bat, he simply went through a process of trial and error. Itachi also noticed that even though he made many mistakes and he was terrible at strategic or logical thought, he never made the same mistake twice, and his ability to think in battle was amazing. Accordingly, the third month was spent in sparring and fighting drills, as well as progress towards Bunshin no Jutsu. He was having immense trouble with this jutsu, and it didn't help that Itachi had missions to do almost every day. He was preparing to enter the ANBU, so he was given more difficult and long missions. It was not unusual for him to be gone several days at a time, which left Naruto puzzling out the complexities of Bunshin no Jutsu by himself. As the month began drawing to an end, Itachi decided to give up on Naruto's genjutsu ability, telling him that he had almost no aptitude for it. Over the 3 months, Kyuubi had also been helping Naruto, but in a different way. More and more of his physical attributes had gone to Naruto, and in some cases it was an obvious change. His eyes, despite retaining their blue hue, were now constantly slitted. His ears had lengthened slightly, and his hearing had improved greatly. His nose, while still keeping its natural appearance, was changed internally, improving his olfactory senses by a large factor. His sense of smell still wasn't anywhere near the level of a dog or a cat, but it would grow with time. He had grown taller by a full 4 inches, and his legs and arms were lengthened. His hands possessed a form of retractable claws, but he rarely used them due to the pain they would cause as they ripped out from his fingertips. He had similar claws on his feet, and he had developed a habit of walking on the balls of his feet, which made his movements appear more feral. His instincts were also augmented, along with his natural reflexes and strength. Kyuubi had told him there would be other physical changes, but he would still retain his human appearance, to a certain extent. At the end of the 3rd week of the month, he was walking back towards the walls of Konoha, having just finished another training period at the practice ground. He was sorely upset by his inability to use the Bunshin no Jutsu, and that Itachi had given up on his genjutsu abilities. He had heard that genjutsu was a vital part of being a ninja, and that the Night-Aim Hokage had been quite proficient at them. So, despite Itachi's belief that he was wasting his time, he continued to practice the Bunshin no Jutsu. After all, Uzumaki Naruto didn't give up on anything. As he reached the walls of the village, he felt the ache in his muscles intensify. He gingerly massaged his arm muscles as best as he could, as he opened the entrance to the town. When the wall phased out of existence for a moment, he stepped through and looked around. One of the things Itachi had drilled into his head was the importance of situational awareness. As a result, he was almost constantly scanning his surroundings. His own natural intuition had been sharpened over his 2 years on the street, and Itachi had found it easy to teach it to him. He saw and felt no one, but still wanted to check. Gathering chakra into his nose, he activated his augmented smell, sniffing at the air. He smelled only the normal scent of the village, with its mingling and gathering of a variety of scents. Just as he was about to shut off his advanced olfactory ability, he scented something alien. He sniffed at it gingerly, wrinkling his nose at the acrid smell. It was smoke. Not just wood smoke, or the smoke from burning meat. He could smell the foul stink of burning plastic, and the strong undertones of heated metal. Somewhere, a building was burning. He hesitated for a moment, not sure what he should do. He contemplated going to the fire, but wasn't sure how he could help. And he definitely didn't want to get caught by the people. But then again, Itachi-sensei had always told him that information was power, and this definitely counted as information. He decided to find out what was on fire, for curiosity's sake. Luckily for him, finding the fire was no problem, thanks to Kyuubi's gift. He followed the fire's scent, not really thinking about where he was going. With his eyes shut, he relied on his sense of smell to guide him, along with his knowledge of the city and its streets. After a short time, the scent began getting stronger. Much stronger. He broke into a jog, wanting to get there quickly. He turned away from the scent and into an alley, knowing it was a shortcut to the origin of the sickly smell. It was getting stronger by the second, nearly overpowering his augmented senses. He withdrew the chakra he had gathered in his nose, sighing in relief as the smell grew much weaker. Even so, he could still smell it quite clearly, and he knew that he must be close to it now. Opening his eyes, he looked around, scanning his surroundings. His eyes opened wide in disbelief. He was only a block away from Ichiraku's. He took another, longer sniff. The smell was coming from that direction. As soon as that thought registered, he was sprinting down the street, using every ounce of training that Itachi had pounded into him. He cursed mentally. What if the ramen stand was on fire? He knew exactly how dangerous it could be, since they worked with constantly burning flame. He rounded the corner of the street and came to a dead stop, aching with dread. He peered down the street at the ramen stand, and his heart came to a stop. The stand was on fire, and smoke was billowing from its wooden roof. He gasped in horror, shocked to his core. After a moment's pause, he was off down the road, shunting as much chakra as he could to his legs to get there faster. As he got closer, he saw a large crowd gathered in a semicircle around the entrance of the stand, standing far enough back that the flames did not harm them. Finally reaching the stand, he quickly shoved his way through the crowd, trying to see what was happening. Finally shoving his way through the last of the people, he burst through the inner edge of the semicircle. What he saw drew him to a horrified halt, as his mind desperately tried to convince itself that it was seeing things. Ichiraku's ramen stand was an inferno. Fire billowed from the entrance, the flaps that had hung from the ceiling already burned to ashes. The sides of the building were awash with flame, and the metal edging was warping and bending in the heat of the blaze. His horrified gaze drew itself towards the inside of the shop, looking for anyone who might be within. He saw no one there, which brought him some solace, but he was amazed at the sheer amount of heat and fire within one small building. It was like everything had been set ablaze at one time, and it had snowballed from there. He had an eerie feeling about this. From within him, a familiar voice spoke, as it so rarely did. "Kit, this is no ordinary fire." The low growling of the Kyuubi's voice echoed within his mind, distracting him from the aching pain within his heart. "What do you mean, Kyuubi? How can you say that?" His mind was focused on what the Kyuubi had said, suddenly feeling very afraid. He had a very bad feeling about this. A very bad feeling indeed. "I sense malevolent chakra within those flames. This was deliberate arson, boy, and it was done by someone with considerable shinobi skill. Watch your back, little one." His comment, despite being quiet and solemnly spoken, ripped through Naruto's mind like a bullet. Deliberately set? Chakra in the flames? A ninja had done this? Why? How? And what had happened to Iam? An old man Ichiraku? If whoever had set this fire had so much as touched a hair on either of their heads, there was a loud shout from behind him, which rang out over the roar of the burning store. "Uzumaki Naruto!" Naruto turned about slowly, looking about. As he turned, the crowd of people parted, giving him a wide area to walk through them. And there, on the other street, stood a shinobi. He was tall and muscular, his raven hair sleeked back, and his clothing a jet black. Over his clothes, he wore a green flak jacket, signifying his rank as a chunin or higher. He wore his Konoha Hitai differently than most ninjas. He had removed the cloth and riveted the metal of it into his vest, directly above his heart. On his back, he had two ninjutsu. One handle came out from behind his right shoulder, and the other was at his left hip. He held his left hand nonchalantly on the handle of the latter, as if showing an unconscious display of power. His head was bowed, almost as if in prayer. Then, slowly, his right hand rose to point directly at Naruto. With a quick movement, he crooked his finger, silently beckoning Naruto closer. Naruto, his head spinning in a mix of anger and sorrow, stepped forward slowly. As he walked through the opening in the crowd, they closed ranks behind him. By the time he had stopped, 10 or so feet from the dark man, they had surrounded them both in a ring of people, faces staring at Naruto without a trace of emotion. Naruto, despite being somewhat intimidated by the crowd, summoned his courage and stood his ground. He was not leaving until he found out what had happened to his Nei-san. And from the look of it, this man knew something about it. Without looking up, the man spoke once more, his voice much lower. "Do you know me?" Naruto opened his mouth to reply, but he was cut off by the man. "No, I expect that you don't. But I know you." He chuckled softly. "Oh, I most certainly know you. I remember watching as you slew my sister. I remember my father falling to protect me. I remember the Yondaime Hokage." His head slowly rose, his dark eyes staring into Naruto's own azure orbs with an intense hatred. "Well, I'm going to give you the courtesy you never gave my family. The courtesy you never gave Arashi-sama." He lifted his left hand before him, bringing it up to his chest. Then, with a single practiced motion, he flicked his index and middle finger up, while curling his ring and pinky. Naruto felt chakra being dispelled near them, and looked around for the source. He didn't have to look long. There, on the top of the building behind the black-haired man, was Ayam and old man Ichiraku. They were bound and gagged, and there were burns and singes on their clothing, but they seemed to be uninjured. Naruto started towards them, but the man grabbed the ninjutsu by his waist, which brought Naruto to a halt. "You haven't heard what I have to say yet, Kyuubi." With that one word, everything clicked in Naruto's head. When the man was talking about his family dying, he was referring to Kyuubi. But why was he calling Naruto by the demon fox's name? "I'm not Kyuubi. I'm Uzumaki Naruto." The man smiled softly at that, baring his teeth slightly. "Oh, I'm sure that's one of your names. However, we all know that foxes are tricksters, do we not?" Then, with a flash, he was gone. Naruto looked about him frantically, knowing that that man was extremely dangerous. Suddenly, there was blinding pain in his right shoulder. He looked at it, watching in a shocked fascination as the flesh and skin of it was sliced asunder, the blade of the shinobi's sword bursting forth. He felt the bile rise in his stomach, but he couldn't look away. He was just so shocked. He had never felt such blinding pain before. Then, the pain hit him in waves, and he screamed his agony out as he was pushed into the ground. The ninja stood behind him, still smiling. He released the sword which was impaling the boy to the ground, and stood back, merely looking at the injured boy. Then, his smile never fading, he raised a leg high into the air and slammed it down onto the hilt of the blade, pushing it even farther into Naruto's shoulder. Naruto screamed once more, and his shock left him entirely. He vomited his last meal onto the ground, groaning as the cold steel seemed to burn his flesh. The ninja in black walked away from him, back to where he had been before. With a leap, he was on top of the building, gathering the two captives in his arms. He brought them back to ground level and dropped them roughly on the floor, ignoring Ayam's muffled cries at Naruto's terrible condition. He paced back over to the blonde-haired boy, squatting beside him. He reached down and stroked the boy's yellow locks, ignoring his moans of pain. "Ah, my little demon, enjoying the taste of my blade? It's one of the treasures of my clan, the Blade of Fire. And, of course, its beautiful sister, the Ice Sword." He gestured to the sword that was still on his back. "Now, are you willing to hear me out?" Naruto ignored him, focused entirely on forcing the pain down. The shinobi did not take that kindly. He grabbed the boy roughly by his hair and shoved his face into his own vomit, making the boy gag and groan in disgust. "I asked you a question, demon brat." "Hi." Naruto barely managed to force out, his throat gagging almost uncontrollably from the stench and taste of the foul muck. The pressure on his head was released, and he moved his head as far away from the puddle as he could. It cost him greatly, though, for when he moved his body the sword seemed to generate a fresh wave of pain. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he reached deep within himself. "Kyuubi, what can you do?" There was a growl in response, Kyuubi's standard answer when he was thinking and did not wish to be disturbed. The demon fox had obviously noticed his vessel's plight, and decided to find a way to reverse it. His lack of verbal response, however, meant that the fox was stumped but didn't want to admit defeat just yet. "Excellent. Now you have two choices." The man leaned down and grabbed the sword by its hilt, giving it a sharp twist. The blade burned a path through Naruto's flesh, setting him screaming once more. Then the boy was grabbed by the scruff of his neck and dragged around, so that his face was pointed directly at the two captives. He got a good look at their condition now. Ayam's clothes were badly ripped, and the old man was sporting a rather large burn down the side of his face. Ayam's eyes met his own, and he saw that they were full of tears. Even the old man was looking at Naruto in such a way, except that his fists were clenched in fury at the dark man's actions. The ninja simply ignored all of this, proceeding with his proposition. "Your first choice is to let these two die, and go your way freely. Your second is to give you life in exchange for theirs." He unsheathed his second blade and knelt next to Ayam. With a swift tug, he jerked her head up and held his sword to the pale white of her neck. Naruto screamed out in fear, hoping that he wouldn't harm her. The man simply looked back at the boy, not caring for the whimpers of the girl next to him. "What is your choice, Fox?" Naruto finally found his voice. He spoke hoarsely, his throat raw from his screaming and gagging. "Why would you kill them? They'd done nothing to you." He grew more animated, and began trying to crawl towards them. The blade impeded his movement, and he was forced to stop. The man simply laughed at him, obviously enjoying himself thoroughly. "Oh, they've committed a grave sin. They've consorted with demons." The last word was bitten out with extreme fury, and the man's eyes seemed to blaze red for a moment. Then, he regained control and his calm and collected state reigned supreme once more. Naruto stared at him, suddenly realizing that this man was completely serious. He would slaughter two innocent people over Naruto. From within Naruto, Kyuubi finally spoke. "This brat has us backed into a corner. At your current level, you cannot free yourself without immense injury, and there is only so much that your body can handle. My regeneration is not instant, and does take some time. By the time I could close the wound, you would be dead." There was a strange cackle growl, the Kyuubi's version of a sigh, and the wound had been cauterized. Fire runs through that blade, and it had completely charred the wound. It would take quite a bit of time to remove that much damage, and he would kill you before it was half done. Find a way to distract him, boy. It's the only way. Naruto acknowledged the words of the demon, but couldn't find a way to distract him. He sighed in defeat. Fine. Kill me, but let them go free. The man's eyes lit up in a strange joy, and he laughed loud and long. When his fit of humor was over, he looked at Naruto carefully. So, your decision is made? Excellent. He stood up once more, removing the sword from the throat of Ayam and dropping her roughly to the ground. He walked over to Naruto, swinging his blade in wide circles. With flair, he abruptly reversed the blade and held it to the back of Naruto's neck, posed to thrust. From within himself, Naruto could hear the Kyuubi frantically commanding him to do something. He shut out the fox, resigned to his fate. He knew he would die, but at least Nei-san and Aji-san would live. He closed his eyes, prepared for death. He heard a grunt from the shinobi, a muffled gasp from Ayam, a splashing of blood, and a low moan, but he felt no pain. Was he in shock? He opened his eyes once more, and cried out in surprise, not believing what he saw. There, lying on his side, his blood pooling against the ground, was old man Ichiraku. The ice blade had pierced his left bicep, and it had frozen the wound shut mere seconds after impact. He saw Ayam's expression, and then realized that the old man had originally been on Ayam's left side, not her right. Suddenly it became clear to Naruto that damned shinobi had thrown his sword at Ayam, and Ichiraku had dived in front of her, taking the kitten meant to impale his daughter. He saw Ayam's eyes turn from shock to a look of the utmost pain and despair. Even through the gag, her screams were loud and heartbreaking. The old man grunted in pain, his arm turning blue from frostbite. The shinobi let out an annoyed sigh, and walked over to the old man. "TCH, don't make me miss, old geezer. I didn't know you wished to die that badly. Have you realized the depth of your sin?" He was going to say more, but he was interrupted by a loud roar of rage from Naruto. "How could you do that? You said that you would leave them alone." He was tensing and pulling against the blade that impaled him, straining towards the shinobi despite the immense pain. The target of his fury merely laughed at him, reaching nonchalantly towards the blade buried in Ichiraku's arm. With an abrupt jerk, he ripped the blade free of his arm, prompting loud screams from all three comrades. He looked at the frozen blood on the blade and shrugged. "It seems you don't understand. I don't want to just kill you, demon. I want you to suffer hell here, as well as in the afterlife. You will watch these two die before your very eyes, and you will hate yourself, and curse your existence. You will die knowing that it was because of you that they have died, when they could have lived long, happy, demon-free lives." He set the blade against the old man's throat, preparing for the finishing blow. Naruto saw the blade being drawn back, saw it plummet down, screaming in rage. Then, the steel met flesh, and half-frozen blood shot forth from the gaping wound. But it was not his neck that was wounded, it was Ayam's back. She had thrown herself across her father, protecting him with her own body. The sword had come down on the flesh above her scapula, splitting it open and freezing her to the bone. Naruto heard her screams, and made his decision. It would kill him, but he would not allow this to go on. He reached deep within himself, envisioning the demon's cage. Ignoring the inhabitant, he directed his attention to the seal they had placed on it. Then, in one swift move, he shattered it. Power flowed through his body. He glowed red with an evil light, his chakra spiking higher and higher. His whisker marks became great clefts in his cheeks, and his eyes narrowed and reddened to a crimson hue. With a great heaving of his strengthened muscles, he shoved himself forward. He felt the fiery blade rip through his skin, tearing through his shoulder. He ignored the pain and kept going, intent on his goal. Finally, his arm was ripped free from his body at the shoulder, the limb still pierced by the burning sword. He ignored the wound, and the blood that poured from it, and rushed at the ninja. The dark man was utterly stunned by the lad's sudden power, but he was not a ninja for nothing. He brought his sword up with tremendous speed, holding it out in front of him. Naruto, running at full speed, slammed into the sword. It pierced through his stomach, ripping his organs apart. That did not stop him. He grabbed the blade and wrested it from its wielder's grasp. Not even bothering to remove it from his belly, he lunged forward, his claws outstretched. The shinobi brought up an arm to guard himself against the attack, but it did him no good. Naruto swept his arm down, raking his claws through the flesh of the man's forearm. Great hunks of flesh and muscle were ripped from it, and white bone showed itself. He screamed out in pain, but Naruto ignored it. He spoke then, his voice still the voice of Naruto, but changed somehow. "I will kill you. I will kill you 1,000 times. Now die." He drew his hand back and plunged it into the man's chest. The shinobi's forehead protector, which was riveted above his heart, was smashed into metal splinters, and the armored vest was no defense. Naruto's hand went deep into him, smashing 2 ribs into bone splinters, and clenched about the dark man's heart. The shinobi's eyes widened and Naruto bared his teeth, revealing abnormally large fangs. His scarlet eyes stared deep into the eyes of the shinobi, who couldn't help but gaze back, mesmerized by his eyes. Then Naruto saw something flicker in the man's eyes. He watched as the shinobi's dark orbs began turning red, with black spots spiraling out from the center. This man had the Sharingan. For a moment, Naruto regained his reason, reminded of Itachi. Then his fury returned with a vengeance. Now there was the righteous anger of the Kyuubi behind it. The Sharingan had been a gift from him to Uchiha Madara, who had passed it down his line. To see one of his descendants turn against the one who gave him his power, the Kyuubi's fury was unmatched even by Naruto's own righteous anger on the behalf of his family. The demon fox wrested control of the boy's body away from him, determined to take his own vengeance. He gripped the man's beating heart tightly in his clawed fist, and then wrenched it forth from his chest. The Uchiha stared at the demon before him, who bore the visage of a mere child. It was holding his own heart in its hand. Then, as blood spilled from his cavity, he was forced to watch as the fox boy ate his heart in front of him. When the vital organ was completely devoured, he watched the boy lick the blood from his fingers, obviously enjoying the taste. Then it stared directly into the Uchiha's eyes once more. As his vision started to fade, he heard the demon speak once more, except this time it was hardly a voice at all, more like an understandable growl. You are a blood traitor. You did not deserve my gift. Now you will die, and my friends will make sure that you are adequately punished. Never betray a demon, human. It's never worth it. With those words, the Uchiha passed from this mortal realm. Blood ceased to pour from his lifeless corpse, and it fell forward with a splash into a pool of its own life fluids. Naruto, the red aura still surrounding him, regained control back from the fox. He saw the mutilated corpse in front of him, and spat on it. Then he turned to see how Ayam and Ichiraku were doing. But what he saw drew him up short. They were both on their backs, staring at Naruto with strange eyes. He saw a mix of fear and despair in the old man's eyes, and a look of loss and betrayal in Ayam's. Then, the full force of what had happened struck him. He had slain a Konoha shinobi in front of a crowd of witnesses. Ayam and Ichiraku had seen him do it, and they had seen him using his newfound power. He knew then that his time in Konoha was at an end. If he was still here by the time the Anbu arrived, as they invariably would, he was a dead man. He began walking towards Ayam, intent on helping her as much as he could before he went. But she crawled away from him frantically, whimpering in fear. He drew up short and stared at his sister in betrayed shock. He never thought that Ayam would reject him as well. He had told her about Kyuubi, and she seemed okay with it. Then, he realized. She had never seen the attack of the Kyuubi, never experienced the gut-wrenching terror of its power. When she thought of the Kyuubi, all that she saw was a smiling Naruto. How could a demon that she had never even seen really trouble her? But now, when she had seen a mere hundredth of the immense power of the fox, she was terrified. He understood then that she would have no more to do with him, and that she would never look at him again without seeing the Kyuubi flash before her eyes. She was no longer his sister, she was his victim. He hung his head in abject sorrow, and felt his feelings threaten to overwhelm him. From within, Kyuubi was commanding him. Its voice was strained and rough as it told him to leave now. Quickly, mortal, or it will be too late. He turned to run, but hesitated for just a moment. Now! I cannot hold much longer, brat. With that, he turned away and ran. He knew that he would never see his Nasan again, and tears fell behind him as he sprinted through the town. He didn't have time to go to the secret exit, and he didn't think that he could control his chakra enough to activate it right then. So he made for the main gates, hoping that they were still open. Just as the gates came within sight, there was a village-wide alarm, which blared loudly across the entirety of Konoha. He saw the gate closing, and knew that if it closed, then he would never get out. He put all his strength into one last, desperate dash. He barely managed to make it through the gate, and as he continued running away from the village, he knew that Anbu would be on his tail almost immediately. He thought of the training ground, remembering something that Itachi had told him once. Under the river, there was a small cave within that held air. The water never entered it, and he had reinforced the entrance with a chakra barrier. It wasn't airtight, since Itachi had made several small holes that served to circulate air. There were emergency supplies down there, and he could hide out there for days if need be. Clutching the stump of his right arm with his left hand, he ran frantically towards the training ground. When he got there, he quickly dived into the river, swimming down into it. He found the tunnel quickly and managed to get inside. He lay on the hard rock floor, feeling the water from his clothes and the blood from his wound pool on the floor, mingling. He felt something strange within him, and it almost felt like his skin was crawling across his flesh. There was a strange boiling within his veins, and his bones ached with